Chapter 60. As the doorway formed by worms quickly took shape, the pace of the bringer of disaster, which was the base of the door, was greatly accelerated. This giant made of corpses and decayed soil dragged its huge feet that were constantly dripping with dark green mucus as it charged straight towards the Devil's fortress that was bombarded by the cannons. In the fortress command room, through the Goblin Observer, node that the Goblin Renaz had set up, the surrounding enemy situation was clearly displayed on the sand table in front of Keyes and the others. The situation was not optimistic. Mr. Keyes, according to the current situation, the demon army around the basin will move to the vicinity of the fortress in, at most, 2 hourglasses. As he remotely controlled the observer, Ricknaz summarized the situation in a concise manner. Boy, I don't know what you're relying on, but based on the current situation, your Camp Batsu can't resist the attack of so many demons. The Demolik Snade's remaining head floated on the sand table. In order to prove that what he said was true, he continued to add, "What's more, although you have a certain number of troops here, most of them are mercenaries from the material plane. There aren't many intermediate and advanced demon soldiers. The higher-ups of the Batsu Devil have obviously abandoned you. Your best choice is to let me use the gate between worlds." With a wave of his hand, the floating Demolika's head was immediately silenced. This was an additional payment of the contract that gave Keyes, the employer, the power. Because the employer had the final right of explanation, Keyes could directly make Snade, who had signed the contract, stop communicating with him with a simple gesture. Those who disturb the morale of the army will be beheaded. Keyes glanced coldly at the Demolik. After saying this, he put his energy back into the defensive deduction. At this time, the bringer of disaster, who had launched a counterattack due to the cannons and caused a lot of trouble to the fortress's defensive position, had already rushed to the front of the fortress. Act according to the original plan. First, get rid of the undead monster and prevent it from destroying the defensive line. When the Bone Demon Herald passed the order of the fortress commander to the front line, the bringer of disaster had already arrived less than 100 meters away from the third layer of the fortress's defensive line. Although the cannons and other long-range attacks slowed down its speed, their effect was limited to this. The Tana Re-Demons, who had been scattered and fled in the last wave, ran out of the fungus forest again under the effect of the parasitic acid mistworms in their bodies. They gathered around the emissary of disaster, relying on its huge body as cover, and at the same time acting as supplies. After several rounds of fire from the cannons, the bringer of disaster's body was continuously shattered. However, it only needed to grab the other demons around it and use them as medicine to effectively heal itself. The underworld demons characteristic of soul and body, they were the best medicine for the bringer of disaster. A new type of undead monster with the dual characteristics of soul captors and tomb demons was the best. Naturally, the Tana Re-Abyss Devils did not have the resolve to sacrifice their lives for the greater good. However, at this moment, the parasitic acid mist worms in their bodies had interfered with the demons' consciousness, making them ignore the fear of death and willingly become the bringer of disaster's tonic. The bringer of disaster, who had consumed a large number of tonics, could not only approach the enemy while constantly healing, but its original vomit attack had also been greatly strengthened. The highly toxic phlegm that could not only kill the enemy, but also use negative energy to turn the dead creatures into zombies. The bringer of disaster was wantonly spraying it as if it was free, which imperceptibly put a lot of pressure and fear on the fortress's defenders. This can't go on. I have to find a way to escape. Broom-browsed Dalton looked at the assault team that had lost more than half of its members and carefully looked for an opportunity to slip away. If it weren't for the demon gendarmerie who had been shuttling back and forth in the defensive line and patrolling, this master of shadow thieves with a hidden second profession would have run away long ago. At this time, A large area of the defensive line had been turned into a filthy quagmire full of negative energy by the bringer of disaster's vomit. Fortunately, there were some priests among the defenders who believed in God. They constantly retreated or dispersed the undead defenders who had turned into zombies. However, as more and more undead creatures appeared, more and more difficult opponents like ghouls and ghouls gradually appeared, which increased the pressure on the defenders. Seeing more and more undead creatures wreaking havoc in the defensive line, even with the Devil's Gendarmerie suppressing them, panic still sprung up like bamboo shoots after the rain, quickly spreading among the mercenaries from the other planes. The target is in position. A diviner in the spellcaster army, who was in charge of detection, shouted with all his strength. He was loudly reporting to his colleagues that the terrifying giant undead monster, the bringer of disaster, had stepped into the trap that had been prepared long ago. Although Snade was extremely unwilling to continue fighting in this fortress under the effect of the contract, he had to contribute his strength to Key's plan. The magic trap that he personally designed, as he was most familiar with the characteristics of the undead creatures, was the most important part of the series of plans made to eliminate the bringer of disaster. The giant undead creature created by the combination of the ritual spells used to create soul catchers and necropolis demons is undoubtedly extremely powerful. However, the original design plan was only to borrow part of the effects of the ritual circle, not to actually summon the monster. Therefore, there is a serious flaw that cannot be remedied: the accumulation of damage. It absorbs corpses and souls to strengthen its various resistances and increase its life force. It also accumulates negative resistances in its body that can cause special damage to the creatures it absorbs. Currently, it absorbs most of the essence of the Tana demons and the Batsa devil. Therefore, at this time, Keyes was tossing a silver coin in his hand, which made a pleasant tinkling sound. Silver coins were called poisonous claws in the lower realms. The reason for its name was very simple. Whether it was the Tana demons, the Batsa devil, or the Yugoloth demons, these demons that lived and bred in the lower realms would feel a needle-like pain when they came into contact with this kind of currency. If mortals held silver-plated weapons in their hands, they would often have an unexpected advantage when fighting these demons. Silver-plated weapons had a natural effect of increasing the damage done to the demons. Demons, who were known for their super high physique, would find it difficult to exert their powerful self-healing ability to heal themselves in battle if they were cut by a silver-plated weapon, even if it was only a small wound. It was precisely because of this that silver coins, a currency that was often second only to gold coins in other material planes, would be discarded like a pair of worn-out shoes in the lower planes, no matter how greedy the demons were. For them, the value of silver coins was not even comparable to the value of copper coins, known as greenhorns. Keyes happened to know this. Because he wanted to carry out the infiltration battle in the Abyss Plane, he had long collected a batch of these strategic materials from the Yugoloth Merchants' Chamber of Commerce. One sole prism was exchanged for 500 kilograms of silver. At such a fair price, Keyes bought and hoarded nearly 20 tons of this metal from the Judgment Demon. Preparing for a rainy day, this preparation really came in handy at this time. If it was a world without magic, it would take some effort to process these metals. But there were spellcasters in this world. With the help of the spellcasters in the fortress, a level 4 transformation spell, Garusto's Metal Dissolution, solved the problem. Under the effect of the spell, the silver ingot first turned into a liquid state, and then weaved into a connected silver net according to the will of the spellcaster. Pieces of silver ingot turned into nets shining with a metallic luster, and the nets were placed into the hollow cannonballs. Just as the Apostle of Calamity stepped into the large-scale undead creature dispelling magic circles set up by the Demolic Snade himself, it frantically tried to escape from the trap that weakened its body and reduced its mobility. The cannons loaded with new ammunition began to bombard it indiscriminately. The silver bullets hit the body of the Calamity Apostle and exploded in all directions. The net made of pure silver was instantly embedded in the monster's huge body. Pain, excruciating pain, the pain that drove the Apostle of Disaster insane, instantly filled its already unclear mind. If it even had won, the damage caused by the silver net was 100 times more serious than the previous cannonballs. Just as Sneyd had expected, after the Calamity Apostle absorbed a large number of bodies and souls of the lower realm creatures, its resistance to the negative effects of silver had accumulated to an extremely high level. The Calamity Apostle was covered by the silver bullets. Under the nourishment of the flesh and souls of the Thanner demons, its body that had become more solid became riddled with holes. The flesh and blood, covered by the remnants of the earth, quickly withered and lost its vitality. The deadly silver net was deeply embedded in its body with the cannonballs. Every time it tried to dig out or squeeze out through the flesh and blood of the body, it would take away a large part of the connected body. The efforts to use the yellow-green sticky corpses that constantly exuded a blasphemous aura to annihilate and corrode the silver net in the body were offset by more and more intensive bombardment. Those responsible for firing the cannonballs were some barbed demons. Even through the shell of the cannonballs, they would be affected by the silver net loaded inside. Therefore, these demons desperately increased the firing frequency, wanting to send these uncomfortable cannonballs to the enemy as quickly as possible. If the Calamity Apostle, a newborn undead monster, had the ability to think, it would have tasted an emotion called despair at this moment. As more and more silver net cannonballs were embedded, its originally huge body was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sneyd's trap originally only made it feel some shackles, but the subsequent bombardment of silver bullets made it unable to struggle at all. Even if there were many Thanner demons around it providing supplements, the increase in the negative effects brought by each demon increased the damage caused by the silver net by several times. A powerful undead monster that had just been born and had evolved to the legendary realm was actually knocked down by less than 2 tons of silver. It was really unbelievable, but it was also reasonable. So, no matter how powerful the monster is, it can't withstand the players who can buy money. War is really about money. In Keys's battle command room, the mechanical warrior standing next to the goblin, Renaz, summed it up with the strange words it was good at. Chapter 61. As the Harbinger of Disaster was smashed to death by Keys's silver bullet attack outside the fortress walls, the mission given by the Harbinger of Disaster was ultimately aborted. The Harbinger of Disaster's original plan was to use this giant made of rotten soil and corpses to break through the defenses of Keys' fortress. They would then open the worm gate inside the defensive position and cooperate with the already assembled demon army to form a pincer attack. With the fall of the Harbinger of Disaster, the worm gate was forced to close, and the worms that formed the huge portico once again disintegrated and reformed in the form of the Harbinger of Disaster. This guy is the Harbinger of Disaster. A construct armor standing in the distance, which was originally advancing with the Harbinger of Disaster's attack, suddenly asked this question near the newly reformed Harbinger of Disaster. The horrifying armor was a high-level construct, and its cost far exceeded that of ordinary activated constructs. These activated constructs were different from the golems. They were not extremely sturdy bodies made of materials such as clay or steel. They looked more like gorgeous armors that could move freely. The empty parts inside the armor were carved with ritual circles or directly instilled with magic power by the creator, which usually made the armor immune to 4 specific spells or some spell-like abilities. Anyone who thought that the horrifying armor was fragile because of this would certainly find that they were so wrong after they started to use it. Not only did the horrifying armor have physical strength close to that of high-level golems, but some well-made creations could also understand the commands of their creators and flexibly use their unique spell-like abilities to fight. As long as the owner of the horrifying armor held the core amulet, they could easily control the actions of the activated constructs. Therefore, they were always treated as personal bodyguards by spellcasters who were proficient in various arcane skills but were physically weak and inactive. At this time, the amulet of the horrifying armor bodyguard was in the hands of its new employer, Keys. This was also one of the reasonable explanations of the contract. The contractor had to cooperate with the employer's service requirements in many ways, such as temporarily lending some unnecessary personal items. Who art thou? What the hell are you? That lich from before. The harbinger of disaster used different words to respond to the words that came out of the horrifying armor. At the same time, a slime ball with the diameter of an adult's height responded. Double entendre was their usual trick. The slime magic ball would quickly solidify once it touched the body. If the gaps of the armor were filled with the slime, it was very likely that the user's mobility would be restricted. However, playing tricks while speaking wasn't a technique unique to the Calamity Bugs. As soon as the slime magic ball touched the armor of terror, the latter's body burst like a soap bubble. Greater Mirror Image was an illusion-type spell that could perfectly imitate the speech and actions of the caster. It could even deceive some creatures that had the eye of truth. Realizing that they had been tricked, the cataclysmic bugs instinctively dodged any possible attacks. But how could the enemy, who had already seized the opportunity, let them do as they wished? A long sword with sawtooth pierced through the void, deeply embedding itself into the body of the worms. The Calamity Bugs wanted to mock the attack that was supposed to be ineffective against them because of their special bodies. But before he could say anything, he was quickly silenced by the effects of the spell. A large amount of amber slime spurted out from the weight of the sawtooth sword and quickly covered the wriggling bodies of the Calamity Bugs. Under the effect of the spell attached to the sword, the Calamity Bugs' many attempts to take the sword out were all in vain. After being trapped in the Acid Fog Canyon for 300 years, the former lich, who was now a demolic Snade, was very familiar with the worms of this plane. Whether it was because of the necessity of studying a way to escape or simply because of his hatred for the worms, he invented some spells that specifically targeted the acid fog worms. Snade's worm specimen making spell was one of them. As a special spell to deal with the Calamity Bugs, the evolved form of the acid fog worms, in addition to the two effects of species-targeted strong immobilization and wax amber seal, this spell also filled the internal gaps of the Calamity Bugs with highly concentrated fluid. A large amount of water was extracted from the Calamity Bugs, and the fluid dyed the wax amber with a dark green color. The terrifying armor that caused all this, or rather, the person behind the armor held the sawtooth sword handle that had been sprayed clean and pulled it away from the Calamity Bugs that had been made into specimens by the spell. It seems that I still underestimated this monster. Snade, the effect of your specimen catching spell is still not satisfactory. The terrifying armor imitated every word and action of the current controller. Even the movement of turning its head was imitated to perfection. At this time, although the Calamity Bugs in the wax amber specimen had difficulty moving, they still had the strength to curse and struggle, as if it had received an answer. The helmet nodded slightly a few times, and then took out other means as a follow-up. Withering needle of imprisonment. The terrifying armor took off an inconspicuous long nail from the armor and filled the gap left by the sawtooth sword in the specimen's wax seal. The long nail fit perfectly into the Calamity Swarm, and the enchantment effect took effect instantly. A wave of energy formed by the power of exhaustion eliminated the remaining power of the Calamity Swarm. Even the spell-like means that they had secretly prepared were dispelled by the deep exhaustion. a pincer attack from both the inside and the outside. The original plan of the Cataclysm Swarm had been realized in another form. At this time, a team of Bats-a-Devil, composed entirely of bone demons, teleported to the Calamity Bugs specimen. This kind of high-level demon that was like an acid mist worm, whether it was for his own research or to later hand it over to the Bats-a-Devil bureaucracy that had an extremely long and hard-to-remember name in exchange for rewards, it was a very good choice. Therefore, he could not just leave it here and waste it. The lucky ones died right away, while the unlucky ones were half dead. These were the words of a bard who had stayed in this mercenary fortress for some time. Many people agreed with him. The bard was very lucky. He blocked the first wave of demons and undead creatures that had just come out of the tunnel, so he was easily killed. The remaining defenders had to endure for a long time. After the Calamity Messenger was killed and the Calamity Bugs were turned into specimens, the people in the fortress finally got a rare chance to breathe. The Bone Demons, who acted as messengers, informed the captains of each team that the demon army would return in an hourglass at most. Therefore, most of the defenders who had survived the disaster chose to take turns to rest in the resting area of the defensive position. Couldn't those mages have been more careful? A soldier who was carrying a wounded person with a missing arm and a broken leg to the medical camp for anesthetized sutures pulled off the pig-nose mask on his face as soon as he returned to the resting area. The half-covering mask that the sorcerers and the craftsmen hurriedly made before the battle to protect themselves from the pungent acid fog in the dimension of Acid Fog Canyon was pinching his nose so hard that it hurt. The soldier couldn't help but grumble. Broom Eyebrows, who was leaning against the wall, could not help but sneer when he heard the soldier's complaint. You're still being picky in the devil's camp. You're just cannon fodder. What's there to complain about? If you have the guts, just like those idiots who were slowly killed by the acid fog, just throw that thing aside and be done with it. Dalton did not suffer the pain of having his nose pinched. He did not wear a gas mask because he had a better choice, a well-made and expensive enchanted mask that fit the contours of his face. Of course, like the soldier, he took off his enchanted mask and breathed in the clean air filtered by the magic circle in the resting area. In fact, most of the mercenaries from the other plane who were resting in the resting area did the same. They were not like his surviving subordinates in the assault team, who seized the opportunity to lie down and sleep as soon as they entered the resting area due to exhaustion. Broombrows was still far from being exhausted. He still had enough energy left in him. He leaned against the wall and narrowed his eyes slightly. As he rested, he secretly observed his other colleagues. This was his habit. Wherever he went, he would weigh his options and find someone who was capable enough. After all, they were fighting against the devil army in this fortress. It was not like the world he had been in before he went to hell, where the two armies fought like chickens pecking at each other. The smart Dalton realized that he could only survive longer in this war if he teamed up with someone who was strong enough. He did not want to be dragged to death by a useless teammate one day. Finally, Broom Eyebrows, who had been pretending to rest, but was actually quietly observing and analyzing, found someone who seemed to be a good candidate to team up with. It was a stranger who was somewhat familiar. He was only equipped with the standard half-stamped breastplate and round shield issued by the Devils of Batsu. Inside, he was wearing a sleeveless linen robe. He was barefooted as he sat cross-legged by the wall. A scarred longsword rested quietly on his knees. The pig's beak gas mask that he had taken off was casually tossed aside. This was a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. The beard on his face was still stubby, so there was no way to completely cover the tattoo on his face. Although the shape of his face was rather thin, he was quite tall. Even if he was sitting cross-legged on the ground, Dalton estimated that he was at least 4 feet tall. From the shape of the muscles on his arms exposed outside the robe, it could be seen that he had undergone long-term professional training in swordsmanship or other weapons. and the barefoot tattooed face was very likely to be a criminal who had been punished. And it was this person, this sword and shield warrior, who seemed to have been punished by Mo Xing, that gave Dalton a special feeling. He was both strange and familiar. Speaking of strange, there were soldiers from all corners of the multiverse in the Batsu Devil's otherworldly mercenary camp. Vicious or perverted criminals were not rare, including the Knoll priest who was killed by Dalton. He had seen all kinds of scum. Even if he just sniffed with his nose, he could recognize the unique smell of those guys. But this young man was different. Although his bright eyes reflected the light of pain and confusion from time to time, a knowledgeable old man like Dalton could still see the conscience and mercy hidden in them. Speaking of familiarity, the sword and shield warrior's eyes were so familiar. Helplessness, depression, puzzlement, all kinds of emotions suppressed his conscience and nature. He was always in self-doubt and always wanted to find a way to spiritual relief. This appearance reminded Dalton of a person he was very familiar with. He really looks like that kid. Maybe he's also a sacred samurai. Well, it seems that he's only a former sacred samurai. Chapter 62. The person whom Dalton was very familiar with was his son, the son of a saint samurai who chose to serve God and embarked on the path of exemplary example. But his father was a mafia boss and a master of shadow thieves who was friends with violence and companions with shadows. This combination was really a bit out of place. This was also one of Dalton's secrets. Any gang member who wanted to inquire about this secret had their necks broken by his own hands. He's so similar to that idiot, perhaps because his thoughts drifted too far away. The always cautious broom eyebrows focused on the barefoot warrior with tattoos on his face for too long. As a result, he was felt by the warrior. A calm and determined gaze was cast over. Dalton did not avoid it. He just showed a self-mocking smile, and then turned his eyes back to the others. Originally, this name was followed by the word fan to replace the surname and to show that he was a saint samurai who worshipped God. But after his title as a saint samurai was taken away due to his conviction, even if he still listened to God's teachings devoutly and did not lose any power from his faith, he could only use the ordinary name of Jason to introduce himself to others. The reason for his conviction was that he murdered a viscount because he saw this noble who swore allegiance to the king wantonly bullying an orphan girl. He drew his sword and killed him in a fit of anger. As a saint samurai who worshipped the god of justice and law, he violated the law by murdering the viscount. After being stripped of his title as a saint samurai, he was imprisoned in the king's prison. The reality was so ironic, but the more ironic fact was that even though he was already in prison, there were still people who wanted to send him to hell as compensation for his life. After being sentenced to imprisonment, Jason automatically became a slave of the Viscount's family. He needed to use a lifetime of service to make up for his mistakes. This agreement was written by the chief judge, who also worshipped the god of law. After being signed by Jason, it automatically came into effect. But it was this agreement that caused his road of atonement to start in hell mode from the beginning. The Viscount, who was tragically killed by Jason, had signed other contracts with the demons of the lower world. When the contract demons belonging to the Batsu people came to collect debts, the Viscount's family did not hesitate to use Jason's service agreement as collateral and handed it over to the demons. After all, sending a saint samurai to hell, even a former saint samurai, was worth a lot of money. Because of this, the Viscount family easily paid off their debt, and the ordinary Jensen walked into an extraordinary bloody battlefield. It was a pair of eyes that were observing the young paladin. The owner of the gaze realized that he had been discovered, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Before Jason could respond, the horn to assemble instantly woke up all the soldiers who were enjoying a nap in the lounge. The demons have appeared again, as Jason muttered to himself. Most of the soldiers quickly put on their pig-nose gas masks, tightened their armors, picked up their weapons, and ran back to their respective positions. In the command room of the fortress, Keyes looked at the imprisoned living specimen of the Calamity Swarm and focused his attention on the magic sandbox in the hall. Commander Keyes, the deployment work has been completed. I have personally confirmed all the links. Ricknaz once again walked into the command room. Under the lead of Keyes, this goblin noble who originally only had the task of observing and learning was deeply involved in this war. After completing the Goblin Observer arrangement, he continued to carry out the arrangements of the young blue dragon. Thank you for your support, Your Excellency. Keyes nodded and pointed at the sandbox with a solemn expression as he said to his companions, according to the information transmitted from the observer node, the number of demons we are about to face will definitely exceed any of the previous battles, and even more than all the demons we have faced before combined. Even if we plan for the best, the fall of the fortress is only a matter of time, and it is very likely that everyone present will personally participate in this battle. Everyone, only by helping each other and working together can we achieve our original goal, to leave this war alive. There was a saying in the art of war, encircle with 10, attack with 5, and fight with double. Outside the fortress defense line, the number of demons had already exceeded the number of defenders by nearly 100 times, and as more demons continued to surge in from all over the acid fog canyon, this number continued to rise. Not only was the fortress commanded by Keyes facing the pressure of the army, but the other 99 airdrop camps of the 9 prisons of Bader that were teleported to this level of the abyss were also facing tremendous pressure. The Abyssal Demon Camp was a vanguard camp formed entirely by the petitioners who believed in the evil dragon goddess Tiamat and Batsu's characteristics. The commander of this camp was an abyssal red dragon whose body had evolved far beyond its peers. As a devout mortal who had turned into a demon, the abyssal red dragon was extremely fanatical about the Dragon Queen's will. The moment it was teleported to the Acid Fog Canyon, it began to build the Hellgate Fortress. The abyssal demons slaughtered the lowly demons in captivity in batches so that the remnants of Batsu's life in these guys' bodies could be used for the last bit of value. They carried out all the procedures of the Hellgate Fortress so strictly that even if the camp was besieged by a large number of demons, they would not skimp on even the slightest part of the process. The abyssal red dragon had its own pride. This former chief priest of the Tiamat sect had a fanatical worship of the powerful 5-colored Megalosaurus. The Megalosaurus's natural scales, claws, and wings, all of them made it envious. After joining the 9 prisons of Bader and becoming an abyssal demon, it had been working extra hard to obtain all the opportunities to advance. Long-term efforts always paid off, and it finally succeeded in growing from a weak abyssal white dragon to a powerful abyssal red dragon. Claws, fangs, wings, scales, these body structures that it used to envy were harvested by it one by one. The current abyssal red dragon was even stronger than some of the Megalosaurus it used to worship. There was no doubt about this. As soon as it arrived at the Acid Fog Canyon, it was attacked by a group of cataclysmic worms, and the Tana Reed demon army controlled by this high-level acid fog demon also brought great danger to the camp. Facing this variable that might affect it from completing the Great Dragon Queens, Will, the abyssal red dragon, who had inherited the red dragon's violent temper, directly led its personal guards to execute a decapitation operation. When the last acid fog worm on the group of cataclysmic worms was ignited by the dragon's breath, the abyssal red dragon couldn't help but laugh. Dragon's breath. This was the ability it had always wanted to have. It could spit out flames that could burn everything like a real red dragon. Just like Keyes before, this was also a kind of compensation for the airdrop plan that the evil Dragon King's Court and Bader's first layer strategic defense attack and logistics bureau had formulated. This ability was very good and very powerful. At this moment, the abyssal red dragon commander couldn't help but think about what kind of reward it would receive after successfully constructing the Hell Gate fortress. At the very least, I'll be rewarded with the same physical strength as a megalosaurus. That's right. Who are you? The Abyssa Red Dragon stared in horror at the strange spellcaster who had unknowingly appeared behind it, and at the same time exposed its thoughts with a single sentence. I am the dragon's secondary body, Hemtar. Following the caster's words, the abyssal red dragon suddenly realized that the light in the sky had suddenly dimmed. The clouds that were originally refracting or reflecting the light of the numerous active volcanoes seemed to have lost their color. No, it's not that the sky has darkened, but the enormous worm's mouth suddenly closed below the abyssal red dragon and its personal guards, sucking in this group of stowaways from the Batsu. That was why the abyssal red dragon and the others felt that the sky had suddenly darkened. However, it was already too late when they reacted. Being sucked into the mouth of a demon lord like the worm tyrant, even a real red dragon would have a slim chance of survival, let alone these Batsu devil, who only had some characteristics of the Penishade dragons. Without even chewing, these snacks were sent into the worm tyrant's stomach pouch with astonishing digestive ability. In the distance, the camp that was building Hell's Gate in full swing was now being attacked by some giant floating acid mist worms that looked like blazing whales. These guys are the firewalkers. Snade pointed at the giant floating acid mist worms on the magic sandbox and explained to Keys and the others, this is another advanced form of the acid mist worms. They are the highest level demons in the food chain of this acid mist canyon, second only to the worm tyrant. Even a Baylor would have to be careful to avoid these creatures when it comes to this level. In fact, I once obtained some body samples of this monster in an experiment, and the results of the analysis led me to an inference. This huge worm monster itself may be the Baylor flame demon that was parasitized by the acid mist worm and slowly turned into this monster. Snade opened his storage dimension and spat out the relevant analysis scroll. He cast a spell to summon a pair of invisible hands and passed it to Keys. My goodness, a Demolic actually has the talent to act as a sword swallower. Riknaz, I think you should record down this obscure knowledge. Mechanical Golem number 21 saw this scene and secretly used an electronic voice to remind his noble goblin friend. Ignoring this strange mechanical golem's habitual jesting, the goblin Riknaz's new invention, the Observer, had the effect of a radar array. Air. It discovered these giant monsters when they appeared in the air near the fortress defensive perimeter. Such a large body, and the way it floated in the air reminded Keys of a type of cosmic beast that the Purple Potato Fairy's mercenary army often raised in his previous life. Chapter 63. Mr. Keys Fenton is extremely talented in commanding battles. He is especially sensitive to controlling the battle situation, so he can always come up with a good plan to attack the opponent. However, an ordinary man could not take away his ambition. He had inherited the warlike nature of the Blue Dragon tribe. Of course, this is not derogatory. In fact, the scene of him personally entering the acid mist wormplane battlefield is unforgettable. Reena's Bloody Battle Frontline Report, Arbus Volume, Chapter 13 inches The Battle of New York, when the Avengers fought against the Chitauri army, which heroes were the main forces that faced the Leviathan. Those who watched the movie knew that it was the Hulk and Thor. How did they deal with the giant beasts? The answer was, hammer it. Jump on the giant beast's back and hammer it. Jump on the giant beast's back and hammer it hard. Currently, the mercenary fortress in the Bartholomew Plain was facing a high-level acid mist worm demon that looked very much like a Leviathan, the sky-burning walker. This was a high-level Tana re-demon unique to the acid mist canyon plain. It was an extremely rare event. The acid mist worm would parasitize and devour an entire Baylor. ordinary acid mist worms evolved into sky-burning walkers. As they continued to eat and grow, their bodies would grow bigger and bigger. Looking at the burning skywalkers hovering in the air like burning airships, Quess already knew what these demons were going to do next thanks to the information provided by Snade the Half-Lich. They were going to use their usual move, launching a collision attack from high up in the air with the help of gravity, then using explosive flames and other spell-like abilities to attack the opponent. The Demolic Snade had also warned Quess that this kind of demon's charge was extremely powerful. Even the giant bull demons, which were known for their physical strength in the abyss and could be seen as the demonic version of a moving fortress, could not directly face the sky-burning walkers' collision attack. As for the fortress's defense system, the sky-burning walkers would only need one dive to pierce through the 3 layers of defense system that they had painstakingly built. Currently, through the scan of the Goblin Observer device, they had discovered that there were 5 sky-burning walkers that were about to arrive. In truth, there was no need for additional assistance. With the burning sky walker's massive body, it could be seen clearly even from a great distance away. It was true that Keyes had greatly improved and upgraded the defenses of this otherworldly fortress, but the time it took to construct the fortress was still too short. Whether it was the cannons or the crossbows, the conventional long-range attacks that Fort Bader was equipped with were not enough to defend against the aerial attacks of the burning sky walker. We can't let these guys launch an air attack. Keyes quickly came to a decision. In order to ensure the success of his plan to open Hell's Gate Fortress, he had to personally take down the floating behemoths that could cause huge damage to the fortress's defense system. Of course, such a surprise attack was not the work of a lone wolf. Together with the commander of the fortress, 30 of the strongest elite bone demon hook soldiers arrived above the burning skywalker with advanced teleportation. They were responsible for dealing with the possible interference of the demon minions. To take down such a massive creature like the burning skywalker, the adamantine scythe sword that the ogre blacksmith Neru had forged for Keyes was a little small. At this moment, the weapon in Keyes' hand was replaced by the personal collection of the camp's chain demon acting commander. It was a giant horse-slaying sword that was 3 meters long and 1.5 feet thick. It was made with Bartobi as the raw material. It was part of the reward that the former commander had to pay for summoning the fire giant mercenaries. Fortunately, the bloodline of the Megalosaurus gave Keyes extraordinary strength. After casting a slight enlargement on himself, he was able to wield the sword and fight. Before launching the surprise attack, the Blue Dragon Boy did not forget to ask the spellcasters to coat the sword with a layer of silver and add as many sharpness spells to it as possible. This enhanced weapon was indeed very useful. Keyes, who had flashed out of the teleportation spell, stabbed it into the tough flesh of the burning skywalker's head without much effort. Like a table knife cutting through meat, the flames on the burning skywalker could not cause any trouble to Keyes. He dragged the giant sword that was deeply embedded in the burning skywalker's back and galloped forward. The sharp blade, enhanced by the sharpness spell, easily cut through the flesh, and the silver coating on the sword made the wound of the giant tower demon unable to heal at all. The burning skywalker, who bore the brunt of Keyes' attack, was greatly injured in the first exchange. It was so painful that it almost twisted into a fried dough twist in the air. However, it was an advanced tower demon that was born from the body of a Baelor. Although it was huge in size, it was not stupid. The abyssal fire that it inherited from its former host burst out of the wound. It wanted to heal the huge wound by burning the flesh. At the same time, it also used an ability that it stole from the Baelor's perfect summoning tower demon. Dozens of sarcomas of various sizes appeared on the surface of its body. Hidden within the sarcomas were large groups of tower demons that had responded to the summons. They were all endowed with abyssal fire armor by the burning skywalker's flesh. Vrox, Bugalas, and Hezrors broke out of their cocoons one after another. They were not immune to fire like the Baylor, and the abyssal fire armor would also cause damage to them. However, this also stimulated their ferocious nature. These demons seemed to have gone berserk and pounced on the enemies closest to them as soon as they appeared. These small fries were naturally dealt with by the elite bone demon sides that launched the surprise attack together with the fortress commander. For a moment, ice walls and abyssal fire filled the burning Skywalker's body. I still need a strong dose of medicine. Keyes, who had fused with the blood essence of the ancient golden dragon, not only had his control of magic improved by a lot, but his blue dragon's ability to control electromagnetism had also reached a new level. The super electromagnetic gun, which originally needed time to charge up, could now be fired instantly. The pure silver cannonball, which was the size of a basketball, was fired at a speed dozens of times faster than the speed of sound. It directly bombarded the burning Skywalker's head. The cannonball, which carried a huge amount of kinetic energy, was heavily embedded in the victim's brain. Then, there was no then. After receiving such a serious injury, no matter how strong one's body was, it was enough to kill them. The burning Skywalker was only a relatively powerful tower demon, not an immortal life form with divinity. The giant beast's vital organs were severely damaged and died. Just like Zeppelin's Hindenburg airship, its body exploded and fell almost vertically to the ground. As for the other tower demons that were attached to its body, if they were unlucky and did not have the ability to fly, they could only fall from the sky together with the giant beast's corpse. If they happened to have the ability to fly, they would be even more unlucky because they would be attacked by the elite bone demons. Before the tower demons fell to their deaths, they would be torn to pieces by the bone demons in the air with their scythes. Chapter 64. In all fairness, demons and demons didn't fight to the death whenever they met. In some neutral lands like Sigil City, these two races could even sit down together and conspire over ale while sipping on evil deeds. It was just that when it came to the blood war, these two races wouldn't care about victory or defeat. They only cared about their standpoint. To demons, all devils, and their supporters on the blood battlefield were mortal enemies that they would not rest until one of them was dead. As the saying went, the hunter will shoot the bird that sticks out, and the blade will chop off the snake in the ground. After becoming peerless on the blood war, one would have to face the fate of being focused fire. After taking down a firewalker, Keth didn't even have the time to feel the joy of victory before more Thanner, demons swarmed toward him in a frenzy. Even the demons who couldn't fly had to make useless attempts to leap up. The other 4 Skywalkers also reacted quickly after seeing one of their kind being shot down. As expected of a newborn demon born after devouring a Baylor, these airship-like behemoths are indeed quite intelligent. Watching as the Firewalker lured Quess into the attack range of the Thanner demons while casting all sorts of spells to prevent teleportation to limit his ambush, Quess couldn't help but raise the threat level of the Firewalker even higher. He didn't have the bad habit of being headstrong. After calmly analyzing the situation, the Blue Dragon youth decisively ordered the bone demons around him to teleport back to the camp and mobilize artillery support. He, on the other hand, took out the railgun ammunition he had prepared beforehand from his spatial belt. Although silver could deal additional damage to lower world creatures, its relatively soft texture would still affect its lethality. Therefore, this batch of specially prepared ammunition had a hollow structure. The interior was filled with silver powder, and the bullet head was plated with silver. Quess named it silver-containing armor-piercing bullets. This batch of ammunition consumed a third of Keyes' silver reserves, twice the cost of killing the Calamity Apostle with the silver bullet offensive. There was nothing that couldn't be done with money. If it didn't work, he would just spend twice the amount. Railgun, fire. Relying on the improvement of his innate ability and the enhancement of his electromagnetic manipulation ability, Keys's large-scale destructive spell was quickly formed. The cannonballs fired from the electric field constructed by the Blue Dragon youth instantly formed a huge barrage of death above the demon army. Vrox, Bugalas, Hezru, Bloodlions, Iron-Armored, Glabrizu, and Plantspawn. All sorts of demons, whether known by their names or not, were torn apart by the silver-containing armor-piercing bullets and crushed into dust. Only the stronger Glabrizu and Soul Judgment Rubik's Cube managed to escape with their lives, ending up as Old Scent. However, due to the silver-containing armor-piercing bullets breaking, silver powder splattered everywhere, forming a silver mist that caused the Tana Re-Demons great pain. The wounds that were originally not fatal became unable to heal. Even if they held their breath, their skin would still absorb the silver powder and cause severe pain all over their body. This was far more serious than the damage caused by some ordinary silver-plated weapons. The powdery silver mist not only increased the contact area with the demons, but the considerate Keys also added another gift pack to it, the Honda Holy Oil, an extract of the wings of heavenly creatures from the heavenly mountain plain of the 7 hills of heaven in the lawful good faction. This thing was much more valuable than silver in the lower world. Although the Honda Holy Oil could also cause harm to demons, it was designated as one of the necessary offerings in the promotion ceremony of some species of Batsu devil, thus increasing its value. Keys had only bought about a few kilograms of it from the Chamber of Commerce of Yugro's Judgment Demons, but the cost of the Soul Prism was 3 times more than that of the silver bricks. However, you get what you pay for. After the silver powder soaked in the Honda Holy Oil exploded into a silver mist, the damage to the Tana Re-Demons was also doubled. Even the powerful demons hiding in the demon army, ready to launch a sneak attack, were forced to reveal their true forms by the silver mist. The commander of this demon army, including the 5 burning Skywalkers, was a gigantic skull demon. Because he was forced to cast a rapid recovery spell to heal his injuries, he had to remove his original high-level invisibility spell. Around his huge, bloated body floating in the air, the foul gas spreading around was contaminated by the silver mist, causing continuous minor explosions. The gigantic skull demon did not have any obvious body structure, but there was a deformed face as big as a carriage on the front of its body that looked like a naked brain. What should be its ears were replaced by a pair of shrunken arms, and at the end of the palms were tiny fingers. For iron chains with sharp nails were connected to the twisted folds and pipes under its body, and it was tied to a few nearby Hezru that it controlled as mounts. The gigantic skull demon was not a species of Tana Re-Demons. They belonged to the more ancient Obilus demons, and were one of the former masters of the Tana Re-Demons. However, the glory of the past had dissipated with the failure of the war between good and evil that swept across the multiverse blindly launched after the chaos. The rise of the Tana Re-Demons replaced the former masters who had lost their power, and the Obilus demon lords chose to hibernate deeper in the abyss. In that great war, the gigantic skull demons were recruited to strengthen the army after the chaos because they had the ability to transplant the flesh of abyssal creatures. These smart Obilus demons did not directly participate in the war, and they survived almost unscathed. Now, they served the Tana Re-Demon Lords in the same way as they served the ancient Obilus Demon Lords, as advisors and flesh craftsmen. Long was such a gigantic skull demon. His previous allegiance was to the Baylor Tardheim, who once ruled the entire Acid Fog Canyon. He also participated in the experiment to create the Worm Tyrant because of his specialty. However, when the Worm Tyrant, the experimental product of the former Demon Lord, swallowed the Baylor Lord and replaced it, Long's allegiance also changed to the new Demon Lord. It had to be said that even if there was a change of dynasty, they would not starve to death and rely on their skills to survive. The gigantic skull demons were even more important under the Worm Tyrant. In particular, after helping the Helminth tyrant use the Baelor demon guards left behind by the previous demon lord to create the most powerful acid mist Helminth demon, the Burning Skywalker Long was directly appointed by the demon lord as a general in charge of training and managing these newborn demons. The opportunity to bully and oppress the powerful Tana re-demons was something that every gigantic skull demon could only come across by chance. Long liked to obey such orders very much. Unfortunately, the good time of being in the limelight only lasted for a few years. A wolf snake demon, who applied for the position of demon warlord under the worm tyrant and succeeded in ending Long's good days. Every time he thought of this, gigantic skull demon Long would gnash his teeth in anger. If it weren't for the fact that he was really not that guy's opponent, whether it was fighting or playing tricks, the wolf snake demon was much better than the gigantic skull demon. Therefore, although Long was resentful of the act of usurping the power of the demon lord and directly giving him orders, he still had to be obedient. That damned wolf snake demon, even the brutal tyrant worm monarch, is much more approachable compared to it. He's said to make the best use of everything. Don't let me have the chance. Otherwise, the resentment in the gigantic skull demon Long's heart did not affect his countermeasure to Keys's attack. This demon that looked like a naked, deformed brain had a much higher degree of concentration than the Tana re-demons. In fact, the slightly stronger gigantic skull demons were immune to mental spells or psionic effects. Even if they were distracted by external objects, they could still handle what they needed to do. This ability benefited from the gigantic skull demon's talent and the survival method of being immersed in bewitching and controlling other creatures. To some extent, after the wolf snake demon warlord assisted the worm tyrant to create the Burning Skywalker, he let the gigantic skull demon lead the army to war for its extremely clever mind and bewitching and controlling talent. This kind of work that the gigantic skull demon regarded as rough work was indeed making the best use of everything. Although it couldn't guarantee that the demon legion would be invincible, at least the commander who led the army to war could restrain the chaotic nature of the Tana re-demons. When facing the old enemy of the 9 prisons of Baelor, he could judge the situation and bring more trouble to the opponent. What a troublesome enemy! The gigantic skull demon, Long's counterattack, came very quickly. As soon as he healed his body, the demon commander released one of his spell-like abilities, Group Monster Immobilization Spell. Except for Keys, who was easily immune, 1/3 of the Bone Demon Squad that followed him to snipe the Burning Skywalker failed to resist the spell. They fell into a state of being immobilized and fell directly into the demon army from midair. Their fate was obvious, so there was no need to elaborate. The gigantic skull demon, who was forced to remove its invisibility state, took the opportunity to control the Hezru mount that was anchored by the animated chain that extended out of its body. It dragged the gigantic skull demon to a burning skywalker that had lowered its flying altitude and hovered above the demon army. Thus, it escaped the range of the silver fog created by Keys's silver bullet attack. Attack! You scum! The worm tyrant will devour anyone who tries to escape. This guy's soul language ability was very powerful. It was like a pay-to-win player opening a public channel, instantly covering the entire battlefield. Even Keys and the bone demons could hear the threatening words roaring out in the abyss language deep in their hearts. Chapter 65. In addition to coercion, the giant skull's control technique also included the option of enticement. The giant skull liked to collect obscure artworks and other valuable items that could decorate their nests. They had a special liking for enchanted magic items. They often carried these things with them, not for their own use, because there were very few magic items suitable for their blasphemous and ugly bodies, but as a reward for their loyal servants. In this way, they were more like pay-to-win players, and that was the truth. The giant skull, Langer, used his deformed arm to take out a large number of rings, amulets, and other equipment with flying spells from the gullies that covered his body. He rewarded these equipment to the demons who survived Keys's Silver Bullet offensive for free. After the bombardment of silver bullets and the invasion of silver mist, they could still maintain their combat effectiveness. This in itself symbolized that these demons were not small fries, and each of them had decent strength. But the giant skull was also a demon, wasn't it? His generosity was based on the premise that these equipment had a small back door. In addition to the effect that allowed the wearer to walk in the air, Langer's gift also had a hidden instruction spell with the spell resonance characteristic. The more demons wearing these equipment at the same time, the easier it was for the giant skull commander to influence the wearer's thoughts. Sensing that the ruby control core embedded in his mouth was gradually smoothing out the magical ripples, the troll commander's turbid eyes that were the size of a car's tire flashed. He issued his first order to the powerful demons that were under his control. "All rise to the sky. Snipe the enemy who shot down the Skywalker with all your strength. Tear him apart. Chew him up. Eat him alive." The giant skull, Langer's language was chaotic, but the goal was very clear, as if they had a shared vision. All the demons turned their eyes to Keys, and then rushed to this fixed target without thinking. No retreat. Use ice wall to divide the battlefield. Also, where is the bone demon that called for artillery support? Why haven't I seen Hellscream hit the heads of these demons? Keys obviously didn't recharge, so he could only rely on the method of roaring to solve the communication problem. As the command in Inferno reached the ears of the Bone Devils, the elite Batsu Scythe soldiers quickly responded. Faced with the demons of various main towers rising into the air, the Bone Demons calmly used their spell-like abilities to summon thick ice walls out of thin air to ensure that the commander of the fortress, who was the main attacker, would not be surrounded and only had to face attacks from a limited number of directions. These intermediate demons gathered together and did their best to clear out groups of enemies in 2s and 3s. They didn't show any signs of panic, or even panic when their companions died from time to time. In fact, no matter how cowardly a demon was, as long as he joined the bloody battle, he would automatically be blessed with fanaticism and fight to the death. These were mental states that the Batsu people, who were known for their cunning, rarely maintained. Not to mention that Keys, as the commander of the fortress, also held the true names of all the bone demons. For the lower world creatures of the Order faction, this was an authority more terrifying than death. They could fearlessly carry out missions against the demons under the command of the fortress commander. However, none of the Bone Devils could answer Keys's question of artillery support for the time being. The reinforcements should have arrived long ago, but the current situation seemed to be a problem with the defensive system of the fortress itself. In the defensive position of the mercenary fortress from another plane, an uninvited guest had arrived amidst the guards who were on standby. Broom Brows looked at the man who had suddenly appeared in front of him. He felt that this man was very similar to the werewolf that his old acquaintance, Mad Dog, had turned into. The only difference was that he was much bigger. This uninvited guest was about 12 feet tall. When he stood up, he was holding a giant axe that was engraved with mysterious symbols and had a ruby embedded at the end. Unlike the werewolves, he had no hair on his body. His skin was the color of blood. He wasn't wearing any armor. Instead, he was wearing a mystic wristband with complicated patterns on his forearm. His claw-like hand tightly gripped the long handle of the axe. His face, which resembled a hyena's, was especially ferocious. His saliva-covered teeth seemed to be chewing on something. There was also a twisted snake, head sticking out from the side of this man's neck. It coiled dangerously and made a disturbing hissing sound. This was the new wolf-snake demon warlord that giant skull devil Lang Ge had a lot of resentment towards. In the plain of Acid Fog Canyon, it served the tyrant worm. In fact, in the entire abyss, only the demon lord was qualified to command this kind of demon. Their footprints were all over the abyss, but this didn't mean that there were many of them. Generally speaking, there would only be one wolf snake demon on each level of the abyss. The rarer something was, the more valuable it was. Although wolf snake demons were few in number, they were extremely powerful. Even the Balers, who were slightly stronger than them, had a trace of respect for these demons. If it wasn't for the fact that it was a matter of life and death, the Balers would feel powerless against the wolf snake demon's innate super regeneration ability. The wolf snake demon was also very dangerous to the Balers because it could ignore most of the damage taken by the supernatural axe and was immune to ordinary poisons. Wolf snake demons often served powerful demon lords as law enforcers. It was also a common choice to supervise the demon army. They would not hesitate to carry out the demon lord's mission. At the same time, they would deliberately get rid of demons that were too presumptuous, as they didn't trust anyone else and usually had a disdainful attitude towards the abilities of other demons. Wolf snake demons were used to solving some key problems by themselves despite having a high position and power in the abyss. For example, after many Batsa camps were airdropped into the plain of Acid Fog Canyon, this newly appointed wolf snake demon warlord even personally led a small team of trusted subordinates to carry out a hunting operation in addition to assisting the tyrant worm in properly deploying the demon army to encircle and annihilate them. This series of actions that involved everything personally could be called a model worker in Tannery. And this wolf snake demon warlord's first hunting target was the foreign plain mercenary fortress that Giant Skull Devil Lango was supposed to deal with according to the plan. There were once scholars who studied demonology who discussed the origins of wolf snake demons. They believed that these Tannery demons with the heads of hyenas and venomous snakes were very likely the creations of the ancient species of Obilus like the Giant Skull Devil. The wolf snake demons did not refute this point of view. However, a wolf snake demon bounty hunter wandering outside the bottomless abyss had conveniently visited these scholars and their disciples while he was on a mission, and borrowed their precious lives. The wolf snake demons looked down on the Giant Skull Devil. They generally believed that the Giant Skull Devil liked to play tricks and habitually avoid war. This could be seen as evidence of the cowardice and ignorance of this race. Thus, even though Lango was arranged to be the commander of the attack on Key's fortress, the wolf snake demon warlord was the first to personally visit the battlefield commanded by the Giant Skull Devil. The wolf snake demon had the eyes of constant knowledge. It easily saw the Giant Skull Devil hiding in the layers of protection of the demon army using a high-level invisibility spell. It witnessed the whole process of Keyes leading the bone demons to shoot down a burning skywalker, and used a kind of evocation spell that it had never seen before to bombard the demon army. "He's just a piece of trash," the wolf snake demon commented to the Giant Skull Devil Langu while rubbing its chin with the soul-sucking ruby inlaid on the long handle of its giant axe to relieve the itch. It's clearly decided to take down this fortress, but it actually wasted its strength to encircle and annihilate a young dragon who just looks a little strange. Humph, ignorant guy. The wolf snake demon saw through Keyes' real human form, but the effect of constant knowledge could not see its excessive size and other unusual places. It could only see that it was a blue dragon in the stage of a young dragon. The blue dragon was originally more proficient in spell casting, so it could use a stronger evocation spell that it had never seen before. Although the wolf snake demon was surprised, it was not difficult to deal with. It should be known that the most direct manifestation of a dragon's strength was its size. For example, Congudius, Targaryen, and other famous true dragons in the multiverse who were so powerful that they could even anger the gods rarely transformed into a human form that restricted their strength. Although there was no lack of valiant dragons who were used to transforming into human form to fight, Those guys were at least at the stage of an old dragon or above. Therefore, the wolf-snake demon believed that the enemy in front of it, who was obviously a young blue dragon in human form, was not enough to subvert the demon's established goal. The operation of the giant skull devil was undoubtedly from the perspective of its own safety. It wanted to solve the hidden danger that the young blue dragon posed to its own safety. This was really a cowardly and short-sighted behavior. When I go back, I'll find a chance to chop off this guy's head. I hope your bloated brain is strong enough. The wolf-snake demon stroked the edge of the giant axe and thought to itself, not to mention the life plan that the demon warlord had silently set for the giant skull devil. The defenders in the mercenary fortress from the foreign plane all became extremely cautious when they saw the underworld creature that suddenly appeared in front of them from its invisible state. Be careful! This is a wolf-snake demon, an extremely advanced Tana. There was no lack of knowledgeable people among the defenders. A spellcaster from a material plane recognized the wolf-snake demon by its unique appearance. However, just as he was about to use a spell to amplify his voice to warn others, he was stopped by a poisonous thorn that pierced his jaw and went deep into his brain. At the same time, more than a dozen assassinations of the same style appeared one after another among the defenders. How could the wolf-snake demon take the risk alone? This demon that had the habit of commanding other Tana would bring along personal guards that matched its status every time it went out. The assassination that just happened was the work of the Babu demons under its command. Chapter 66. Broom Eyebrows was also unlucky enough to become the assassination target of a Barb demon assassin, but the latter was even more unlucky than him. Dalton was a shadow thief master who hid very well. What was a shadow thief? Shadows were like clothes, and dark blades were companions. What was a shadow thief master? Shadows submitted to willpower, and dark blades submitted to majesty. Unlike assassins, shadow thieves rarely sacrificed themselves to make a move. They were better at sneaking and ambushing, and they were better at instinctive dodging. Before the Barb demon's thorns could pierce Dalton's body, its body, which was still in stealth, was hit by the spiked gloves. The demon was directly knocked out of stealth and fell in front of the other defenders without slowing down. Naturally, it ended up with axes and was chopped to death. At the same time, the military police team formed by the Batsa Devil also noticed the demon's aura. Under the leadership of the Bone Demon elites, groups of Barb demons launched an attack on the instigator of all this, the wolf-snake demon that suddenly appeared. The demon's attack could not be said to be slow and fierce. This was the way to deal with a powerful demon like the wolf-snake demon. The three ogre brothers, who were left behind by Keys to supervise the battle, also went into battle to meet this Tana who dared to rashly enter Bator Fortress. However, the wolf-snake demon, who was about to be stabbed by sharp blades, suddenly changed its appearance in the face of the attacks that emerged from all directions. Beheading sword, double-headed sword, flail, one-handed axe, warhammer, shield, 6 arms, 6 different weapons. The original wolf-snake demon's body flowed like water waves, and between the light and shadow, a 6-armed snake demon replaced the former and appeared in front of everyone. Sword barrier. The 6-armed snake demon used its special skill, and the enchanted weapons formed a wall made of cold iron and sharp blades. For a time, it tore apart the attacks of Bator Fortress's defenders, and it even used its huge body and extraordinary strength to launch a wave of counterattacks. Dozens of Barb demon guards that had been caught in the 6-armed Naga demon's sword barrier did not even last half a breath's time before being chopped into pieces by this demon's weapon. An elite bone demon that tried to launch a sneak attack was swept up by the 6-armed Naga demon's long tail and was crushed into pieces by the pressure. This unexpected situation caused the defenders of Fort Bator to be thrown into disarray. It wasn't until the six-armed Naga's physical strength had slightly decreased that the ogre blacksmith Neru, who had a strong physique, used a 2-inch thick ebony flail made of adamantium. If the flail was made entirely out of adamantium, even the ogre Neru wouldn't be able to lift it, that the ogre blacksmith Neru forcefully broke through the sword barrier's defense and counterattacked. Only then did the defenders of the fortress regain some ground. The six-armed Naga's enchanted blade, made of abyss-cold iron, added many crisscrossing cracks to Nalu's weapon. The ogre Ironheart was in so much pain that he was about to go mad. He immediately launched a fierce attack on the demon. Seeing their brother rush forward, Palu and Bru naturally wouldn't just stand by and watch. Witch-Doctor Paru waved his troll skull staff and cast a weakening curse on the six-armed Marillion. Due to the demon's resistance, the curse of enfeeblement did not fully take effect, causing him to fall into a powerless state where he could not lift his shoulders or hands. However, it also had the effect of slowing down his movements, creating an opportunity for the clever Bru to launch a pincer attack. The ogre gourmet Bru, who was so smart that he didn't seem like an ogre, had been waiting for a long time. He circled to the side of the six-armed Marillion and waited for an opportunity to throw out a bramble net with silver-plated iron thorns. At the same time, he used his vaporized body to avoid the demon's coiling tail attack. Generally speaking, the ogre race couldn't crush the powerful six-armed Marillion in terms of strength. However, there were always exceptions to everything. For example, the ogre Bru was so smart that he didn't seem like an ogre. The ogre Neru, who aimed to become a blacksmith master and weapons master, also far surpassed his peers in terms of strength. The six-armed Marillion suffered a great loss because of her own inherent knowledge. She directly used her cold iron shield to receive the furious blow from Bru's ebony staff. Immediately afterwards, the cold iron shield shattered. Although the six-armed Marillion had an excellent physique and didn't suffer any injuries such as bone fractures, the arm that held the shield still became sluggish due to some dislocation of muscles under the violent impact. Hiss! It wasn't clear whether it was because of the pain or because it was used to looking like a snake. The six-armed Marillion realized that if this continued, it would be really dangerous. While carefully dealing with the situation in front of her, the six-armed Marillion used the Tana Re-Demon's specialty, summoning Tana Re. She didn't choose to summon her own kind because, after all, she wasn't as powerful as the wolf snake or the Baler, who could perform a perfect summon that was guaranteed to succeed. Moreover, the demons that were slightly more well-informed wouldn't respond to the summons of their own kind from the Acid Fog Canyon. No demon wanted to have a few acid fog worms parasitizing their body. Although the six-armed Marillion was strong enough, it still couldn't make the worm tyrant make an exception for her like it did for the wolf snake. For Hezru responded to the summon. These demons that were addicted to fighting were the best candidates to deal with the current situation. These Tana Re-Demons were like large toads wearing tumor-like armor. A strong stench of steam and liquid spurted and secreted from the skin of the Hezru demons. As soon as they appeared, they were immersed in the excitement brought about by the battle. Without thinking or hesitation, the Hezru demons rushed to the nearest enemy with their bare hands. Because they were too emotional, the Hezru demons opened their big mouths under their reptilian eyes and didn't burst out with a deafening roar. Instead, they gnashed their teeth and made a disgusting grinding sound. Their target was the ogre Neru. The brawny man who was focused on hammering the six-armed Marillion was enveloped by the horrible stench of the Hezru demons. Fortunately, his brother, Paru, who always had potions, gave him a dose of the energy potion spray that Keys named Hwaseong Vital Energy at the critical moment. It neutralized most of the discomfort caused by the stench. Not only was the ogre greatly affected, but the breathing system of the surrounding fortress defenders was also ravaged by the soul-seeping stench secreted by the Hezru demons. Even the standard pig-nose gas masks could not completely block out the stench. On the contrary, Paru's potion spray could not neutralize the stench due to the mask's obstruction. For a moment, the soldiers vomited nonstop. Fortunately, the spellcasters in the fortress quickly joined the battle. They cast spells such as Steel Lungs and Air Filtration on the soldiers around the Hezru demons to resist the stench. With the help of the spellcasters, the situation of the battle immediately changed. Soon, the chaos caused by the sudden appearance of the Hezru demons was resolved. Although the Hezru demons were disgusting, after their abilities were suppressed, they could no longer pose a threat to the mercenaries from the other plane of Bator, as well as the military police made up of bone demons and barbed demons. Although the six-armed Marillion was difficult to deal with, it was delayed by the violent attacks of the ogre demons. It would be sooner or later killed by the numerous defenders in the fortress. But where did the Leakin go? Was the leader, who was said to be serious and responsible, was also a fan of posing, using a substitute every day to fool around? Of course not. The Leakin was in the fortress at the moment. If this operation was a hunt, then the six-armed Naga and the Babu demons were the bait. They only needed to attract the attention of Batsu's forces. The one who would deal the final fatal blow to the prey would definitely be the wolf-snake demons themselves. As an experienced hunter who was familiar with hunting techniques, the wolf-snake demon easily selected two of the most valuable targets for itself to attack. The first was the command center of Bator Fortress. According to the nature of the demon's order, as long as the command center was destroyed, the fortress would most likely be paralyzed immediately. However, according to the Leakin's observation, although the number of demons in Bator Fortress was not large, the mercenaries from other planes were not weak as a whole. In addition, the scale of the fortress and the construction of the fortifications were quite impressive. It was likely that there would be powerhouses in the command center, and they would have already set up targeted traps for the beheading operation. It had to be on guard. Therefore, this extremely cunning demon shifted its gaze to the secondary targets in its mind, the spray weapons that the Batsa demon called Hellscream. The wolf-snake demon was not an ignorant person. As a warlord, he was naturally well-informed. It naturally knew the various weapon configurations of its old rival, the Batsa demons. The information regarding the defeat of the Calamity Swarm and the Apostles of Calamity in this fortress had been relayed to the Leakin demon through the communication function of a special demon worm. He realized that this weapon had played a crucial role in this. If it could be destroyed, it would certainly cause a great blow to Bator Fortress. This fortress doesn't seem to have been built for a long time. It's not equipped with a magic defense system. It only relies on these spray weapons that can't be underestimated to fight against the Demon Lord's army. If this front tooth is pulled out, how can this group of country bumpkins, who were tricked by the Batsa demon to participate in the bloody battle, resist the huge number of demons? Don't you think so? The first part was all the evil plans that the Leakin quickly conceived in its mind. The last sentence was a question in the infernal language. The subject of its question was an elite bone demon scythe that had just teleported back to the camp. It was telling something to the barbed demon centurion, who was waiting in the fortress's artillery position. Without a doubt, the wolf-snake demon raised the long-handled great axe in its hand. It did not even use the blade of the axe. It only used the end of the axe handle, which was inlaid with sharp rubies, to smash the bone demon's organ into pieces. Excellent idea. Revealing itself from the invisibility, the snake-like mouth behind its hyena-like head let out an excited hiss. The Leakin demon swung its giant axe and chopped off the skull of the bone demon that had been smashed in half, as if it was demonstrating its power. Then it kicked a cannon that was named by the creatures of the underworld into two. The barbed demon centurion saw the powerful Tanali in front of it and could not help but shout with all its strength, "Enemy attack!" Then it was interrupted by the Leekin's Greytax. Chapter 67. My inherent understanding of Baylor as the most powerful Tana demon in my mind was rewritten by a sudden change. A wolf-snake demon, just like its appearance of a wolf and a snake, this powerful Tana demon had both the ferocity of a wolf and the cunning of a snake. His surprise attack was like a hunting activity that he had been familiar with for a long time. First, he released the bait, then handed over the sharp knife. Although the plan was simple, it was very effective. Even in my opinion, the defensive system of the fortress was still remarkable, but it was as if a giant axe had smashed through the armor and hit the vital point. However, this experienced hunter still failed in the end. It was all thanks to the fearless mechanical puppet, Mr. Number 21, my familiar and reliable old friend, and Mr. Snade, who was hired by Mr. K's, a demolic with powerful spellcasting abilities. The two of them worked together to turn the tide. Report of the bloody battle in Reichenaz, Arbus Volume, Chapter 17, Acid Fog Canyon, inside the mercenary fortress in the Bartholomew Plain. The six-armed snake demons and barb demons under the wolf snake demon's command all used the spell-like ability of summoning Tana demons to delay the attacks of some of the defenders in the confrontation. Although their failure was a foregone conclusion, they still resisted because their warlord had not given the order to retreat. How could the wolf snake demon retreat now? The hunting activity was gradually reaching its climax, and it was the critical moment to harvest the prey. This Tana demon's character was indeed cunning, but when it actually entered the battle, its cruel and violent nature dominated its brain. This was a demon that was never afraid of battle. On the artillery position of Bartholomew Fortress, the barbed demon cannoneers spurted blood and burst out screaming because of the giant axe slashing them, making the wolf-snake demon's blood boil and extremely intoxicated. For a moment, the demon, who enjoyed the battle and slaughter, actually forgot its previous plan to prioritize destroying the enemy's artillery. Maybe we should kill these bats of bastards first. Anyway, there's still time. After all, they are weak and cowardly, so it won't take much effort. The wolf and the snake, two heads, one thought. The behavior of this demon warlord seemed to be a satire to its previous criticism of the giant skull demon for not carrying out the mission according to the set goal. But that was the reality. After all, be strict with others and lenient with yourself was the standard behavior of a normal Thaner demon. Just like how Keyes had activated peerless mode in the demon army not long ago, the Leekin demon's battle in the Devil's Cannon formation was even better. The axes struck flesh, severed limbs, and blood flew everywhere. Howls of anguish and cries of pain resonated. When the powerful demon warlord faced the barbed magic cannoneer, who was far from his match, the battle was as simple as cutting vegetables. Even if the number of devils was 100 times greater than his, he would still be able to crush them with his strength. Whoosh! A light sound came from behind the demonic wolf snake. The devil who was ambushed didn't even turn his head back. He simply swung his axe and shattered the illusory shark's head that had yet to materialize. Your takeout is here. Strange words spoken in the abyssal language came from the mouth of a construct that looked like a mechanical man. Standing beside him was a female Sawajan high priestess, and the demon overlord reckoned that it was the latter who had ambushed him. Two small fries, nothing to worry about. The demonic wolf snake, who had always been known for its calmness and wisdom, might have been immersed in the excitement of killing, so his judgment this time was obviously off. If it was reasonable to call the Sawajan high priestess, who looked like a shark, small fries, then calling the mechanical man, number 21, the same name was purely a mistake. no matter which angle one looked at it from. Such a judgment could be said to be 1,000 miles off, whether it was the appearance or the strength. The demonic wolf snake soon paid the price for its carelessness. The mechanical man-warrior's attacks were like a storm, and in the blink of an eye, it suppressed the powerful demon Thanner Re. In a moment, the offensive and defensive positions were different. One must know that when they encountered the Baylor demon previously, it was number 21 who took the brunt of the pressure head-on, creating an opportunity for Keys and the others. The unknown energy surging in the mechanical man provided it with enough strength. The combat skills obtained from various channels, after being optimized by the processing module, allowed it to have the combat ability comparable to a high-level monk. The demonic wolf snake really didn't have a good way to deal with the construct that was spouting all kinds of strange words while fighting. In the past, the enchanted giant axe in its hand, which had the effect of penetrating attacks, was invincible, but it couldn't cut this guy's body. In front of the high-grade goblin alloy, mixed with a large amount of adamantine, the natural weapon that the demonic wolf snake was proud of paled in comparison. Not only that its snake's kiss, which contained supernatural venom, was also unable to bite down on this construct. In addition, there was also a high-level Sahuagin spellcaster who was constantly casting spells to interfere with it. As the battle with the mechanical man was in a stalemate, the demonic wolf snake had to rely on its own race's resistance and immunity advantage to resist the spell damage. Before the demonic wolf snake's judgment of 2 small fries could be heard, it was slapped in the face. Of course, although the mechanical man warrior was strong, it was still a little powerless to capture such a demon warlord in one fell swoop. At the very least, with a spellcaster of the level of the Sahuagin High Priestess, there was no way to crush this powerful demon Thanner Re. But with a half-lich who had once reached the legendary realm in spellcasting, the situation was very different. An armored arm appeared from invisibility and directly caught the demonic wolf snake's kiss, which was guarding against a pincer attack from behind. Touch of Withering, a new spell that the half-lich had improved after many years of bug removal experiments. Its effect was similar to the Withering spell, which could absorb the moisture in the living body and cause the flesh and blood to wither. But at the cost of the harsh touch spellcasting method, Snade mixed in 2 new features, lifesteal and regenerative inhibition, into the spell. Although this spell failed to bug removal, when used on the demonic wolf snake, it had an amazing effect, because lifesteal and regenerative inhibition perfectly restrained the demon Thanner Re's super regeneration ability. This spell caused great damage to the demon that was caught in a fierce battle. How should one describe the specific damage? It was better to chop off its head, so that it could at least rely on super regeneration to regrow it. Under the effect of the Touch of Withering spell, the demonic wolf snake's kiss directly withered and propped up on its back like a fried dough stick without water. Even my father didn't hit me like this could perfectly express the demonic wolf snake's thoughts at this moment. Although it didn't know whether or not it had a father or who his father was, the unique spell of the half-lich Snade had indeed brought the demon extreme pain that it had never experienced since its birth. The sudden sharp pain made the demon commander accidentally bite its own tongue, and blood flowed down the corner of its mouth from its hyena-like face. But it was quite stubborn, and this proud demon, Thanner, didn't cry out because of the pain. The demonic wolf snake used its body to forcefully resist the fist of mechanical puppet number 21 and cast an advanced dispel spell on the activated armor that caused great damage to it. It didn't know that the half-lich's skull was hidden in the terrifying armor. To resolve the spell that the latter might continue to cast after the Touch of Withering, but its plan failed again because the demonic wolf snake's advanced dispel spell met the half-lich's anti-magic ray. With the advantage of intelligence and supreme magic skill, Snade hit the target first, and the demonic wolf snake's innate spell-like abilities were all ineffective for a period of time. As a result, not only did the Advanced Dispel spell not work, a series of spells that the demonic wolf snake could cast at will, such as Malicious Polymorph, Blasphemous Whisper, Deafness, Lightning Beam, and Telekinesis, were all ineffective. Even important life-saving skills such as Advanced Invisibility and Advanced Teleportation, which were convenient for its escape, couldn't be used. At this moment, the demon was in real danger of death. This is not the ability of the activated armor. This is having lost its spell-like abilities before it could do anything else. Mechanical Puppet number 21 seized the opportunity and hammered it. The demonic wolf snake, who was struggling to dodge, finally recognized from the magical waves transmitted from the terrifying armor. This is a lich, the strange lich with self-destructive tendencies that was mentioned in the message from the cataclysmic bugs. Although the demonic wolf snake didn't know why the lich, who should have returned to its phylactery, appeared in Fort Bator, it quickly realized that it had to retreat immediately. It mustered all its strength to block the terrifying attacks of the mechanical puppet. It didn't have the courage to attack the lich, an undead creature that was more powerful than itself. Instead, it chose the weakest target, the Sahuagin, as its escape route. But once again, it misjudged that the Sahuagin had a bit of a temper. The Sahuagin summoned two ghost sharks, the undead giant-toothed sharks that were emitting ghostly flames, blocking the demonic wolf snake's escape route. At the same time, the demonic wolf snake, hidden in the terrifying armor, strengthened the giant-toothed sharks, allowing them to grow energy-absorbing tentacles that could capture the demonic wolf snake and bite it while absorbing its energy. Originally, the summoned creatures were nothing to the demonic wolf snake, which was a powerful Tana re-demon. But now, the two undead creatures that it could easily crush had destroyed the demonic wolf snake's last hope of escape. Not only did the mechanical puppet warrior's powerful fists and blades were branded on the demon's back like a shadow, but the demonic wolf snake, after strengthening the giant-toothed sharks, also cast another representative spell of the school of necromancy, Finger of Death, with ease. Just like its ferocious name, Finger of Death could instantly kill a living creature. The only way to avoid it was by relying on the body's toughness. And even if the spell was successfully avoided, it would still cause a lot of damage. At this moment, the demonic wolf snake's miserable state could be used as a reference for this spell. Although it relied on the body's toughness to avoid the instant death effect, a wound the size of a pot lid still appeared on its back, not to mention the skin and flesh. Even the spine that supported the body was exposed. Mechanical puppet, warrior, no. 21 followed up with a blow to the head, becoming the last straw that broke the camel's back. The demonic wolf snake was dead. In fact, although the demonic wolf snake could indeed suppress the powerful Tana re-demon with its ability to control magic, but at this moment, Snade had already degenerated into a demonic wolf snake and lost part of his body and power. If not, he wouldn't have hidden inside the terrifying armor to fight. The demonic wolf snake didn't intend to make a move at first, but he was like a web novelist who was encouraged by all kinds of rewards. Snade received the order from Keyes through the contract, so he had no choice but to do his best to eliminate the threat to the stronghold's safety. With the death of the demonic wolf snake, the giant axe that accompanied it gradually rusted and decayed. This was the most important basis to determine whether the demon had truly disappeared or not. After confirming the completion of the mission, Snade leisurely said, "Death is the most brilliant thief. It will steal everything from the dead." But obviously, the allies who had just experienced a great battle didn't have the same poetic sense. Mechanical puppet warrior number 21 waved his fists and asked in a cold electronic voice, "Have you voted?" Chapter 68. Only Ricknaz was left to guard the battle command room, which was originally the brain of the mercenary fortress from the other dimension, but the fortress did not fall into chaos. Even though they were ambushed by the wolf snake demon, the entire camp regained its order after the invaders were eliminated. The artillery support that Keyes had been longing for finally successfully arrived at the battlefield after several twists and turns. However, most of the elite bone demon hook and sickle soldiers that had followed him into the demon army had been killed. Fortunately, the enhanced artillery shells supported by the artillery once again turned the battlefield into a silver mist. Most of the land demons that could only rely on roaring, cursing, and long-range spells to attack Keyes' assault team fell into the burning itch caused by the silver powder. The frequency and accuracy of their attacks were greatly reduced. After killing the last wave of Tana, re-demons that could either fly or fly in the air, with the help of the magic items bestowed by the gigantic skull demon, to besiege the assault team, Keyes finally came close to the brain that commanded the demon army. It really looks like a deformed brain. This was Keyes' intuitive impression of this Obilus demon. Looking at the gigantic skull demon, winking at him and making a charming expression, the blue dragon teenager almost vomited under the influence of the aesthetics accumulated from 2 lifetimes. This was the effect of its innate ability to bewitch and control. If it was not immune, it would fall into a terrible state of worship for the gigantic skull demon's deformed appearance and self-denial of its image, or even self-loathing. That way, it would be easy to fall into the trap of this Obilus demon and be controlled by it. Fortunately, both the bone demon and Keyes passed the bewitchment appraisal. This also made the gigantic skull demon, who had confidence in its appearance, very angry. Lang Gu used his shrunken arm to scratch the front armpit of his body, the part that was similar to the brain's temporal lobe, to control his anger. I have to say, this kind of body shape that is similar to exposing the brain is quite convenient. No. Keyes immediately realized that he was still inadvertently affected and quickly expelled this strange sense of recognition from his mind. At the same time, he raised his vigilance against this ancient Obilus demon. Not to mention Keyes' stress reaction. Giant skull demon Lang Gu, who was the nominal commander-in-chief of the demon army, also wanted to curse in his heart at this time, although I don't know if he did. Originally, he was a craftsman who relied on his own skills to make a living. However, he was promoted by a leader who came out of nowhere and became the leader of the 8 clan, who carried the burden of war. Yet the soldiers under his command were the Tana demons of the bottomless abyss. While this could be seen as the remnant arrogance and prejudice of the ancient species of Obilus, it was not without reason. In Long Ji's opinion, the Vroks flapped their wings foolishly as they flew in the sky. Their frail bodies were like chickens flying in the sky. Spores would fall from time to time due to their carelessness in hygiene. Although the Hezru walked upright, they preferred to walk on all 4s, which made them look like oversized toads. Their stench was beyond imagination. Before they could affect the opponent, they had to kill a group of allies first. Even if the anchoring base of the animated chain under him was stable, it was also because he used the chain to distance himself from it. In addition, he controlled the chain to clean it several times a day through his mind. Occasionally, there were a few Glabrizu who could fight, but they were selfish by nature and were used to going back on their words. He had to spend his precious energy every day to brainwash them before they were willing to risk their lives and fulfill their responsibilities like qualified demon cannon fodder. In short, the giant skull demon felt that it was truly unlucky for 8 lifetimes to have to lead this bunch of useless people into battle. It was better to rely on oneself than on others. In the end, Lang Gu still had to rely on himself. He could not count on those demons who were trapped in the silver mist caused by the cannons of Bardo Fortress, who were running around like headless flies, and who were yelling and running around aimlessly. Seeing Keys rushing toward him, Giant Skull Demon did not care that he had beheaded another precious firewalker. He had been silently calculating how long it would take for this humanoid creature, who seemed to have transformed from a true dragon, to fall into his trap. Yes, this sinister Obilus demon had prepared a trap. Using his biological modification technology, Langu had designed a plan to rapidly increase the strength of the new Tana Re-demons when he was cultivating the Firewalker. The corresponding price was that the success rate of the acid mist worms hatching from the body of a Baler was greatly reduced. This was also the reason why the demon lord of the Acid Mist Canyon was a Baler. There were originally a large number of Tana Re-demons gathered here, but now almost all of them had disappeared. Whether it was the Calamity Worms or the Firewalker, they would only retain part of the original host's abilities after they were born. The former could rely on a large number of acid mist worms and Tana Re-demons to produce a qualitative change through quantitative change, thereby piling up a new race of Tana Re-demons. But for the latter, it was difficult for a single acid mist worm to devour a Baler that stood at the top of the demon pyramid. Just finding so many Balers for the acid mist worms to live on was a big problem. Balers were not cabbages. Even if the former demon lord of the Acid Mist Canyon, Tardheim, had a racial advantage and gathered a large number of Balers, this large number only referred to about 50 of them. When creating the Firewalker, even with the combination of the Tyrant Worm's suppression and Giant Skull Demon Lang Ji's superb biological modification ability, the success rate was not more than half. In theory, they could only create about 20 of these new demons at most. It should be noted that although the Firewalker was powerful, it had only randomly inherited a portion of the Baler's abilities. If they could only produce some defective products after using so many raw materials, it would be a waste of resources and a loss. The Giant Skull Demons were extremely shrewd, and Langu was no exception. Therefore, when he participated in the creation of the Firewalker, he used the highest level of flesh modification technology of his race, genetic material grafting, to make up for this flaw. Unlike simple tissue and organ transplants, the genetic material mastered by the Giant Skull Demons could provide the recipient with the genetic template of other creatures' recessive abilities. However, this ability would greatly increase the failure rate. It was precisely because of this that the number of Firewalkers that could theoretically be born was cut in half. In the entire Acid Mist Canyon, with the help of the Giant Skull Demons and the Tyrant Worm, only 13 Firewalkers were born. So, what kind of recessive ability did Giant Skull Demon Lang Gu implant in these newborn Tana Re-demons? The answer was the Hound Demon. This creature had the ability to devour and evolve. When it killed a humanoid creature, it could devour its flesh and life essence to promote its own evolution. After fully studying the genetic template of this recessive ability, Langu improved it. The target of devouring was not limited to humanoid creatures. As long as it was a creature with common life, it could be used as nutrients for its evolution. When applied to the new Tana Re-demons like the Firewalker, this ability was an excellent way to make up for its own shortcomings. After all, the Abyss had no lack of Tana Re-demons of all kinds. In addition, the Giant Skull Demon had a little selfish motive. The Hound Demon was an evil creature that belonged to the Order faction. Langu hoped that by grafting its genetic characteristics, his work would be tainted with this Order faction tendency. At least, it would be easier to command. To be honest, this method did have a certain effect. After Key's assault team killed a Firewalker, the remaining Firewalkers did not rush forward like the other Tana Re-demons. Instead, they decisively lowered their altitude and sought cover from the demon army. This showed the increase in their intelligence. And under Lang Ji's instructions, they began to devour a large number of dead Tana Re-demons. They even began to eat the corpses of their own kind that had the most similar life form to them. As one of the creators of these firewalkers, the giant skull demon could clearly feel that the Baylor demon ability that originally only existed in part in these works was rapidly improving and replenishing. Although their overall strength was not comparable to their previous host, their body size was much larger than the Baylor demons, so they had relatively more life force. It had to be said that similar to Keyes's learning by sleeping, this kind of growing strength by eating was really an ability that made people envious. 1 step, 2 steps. In the blink of an eye, the giant skull demon was counting Keyes's steps. When he reached the predetermined mark, a firewalker that had completely mastered the advanced teleportation ability instantly flashed and slammed into him. The burning Skywalker had also grown 2 thick arms and automatically grasped the Baylor's expertise in grappling. After successfully slamming into him, a hug kill followed up and tightly strangled the blue dragon teenager, who had transformed into a human form. This was not the end. In addition, the spell-like abilities inherited from the Baylor, Decree, and Firestorm were cast in succession in order to kill the leader of the Batsu's surprise attack team without any mistakes. This series of attacks almost worked. At this critical moment, Keyes could not continue to hide his strength. One of the benefits of the system upgrade before being airdropped, fusing with the life essence of the old gold dragon, was that his resistance to fire had exceeded immunity in the general sense. In the moment when he was distracted by the Decree, the firestorm was unable to cause any damage, and in the midst of being tightly captured, this Keyes decisively returned to the body of a true dragon. In terms of hand-to-hand combatability, the Megalosaurus had always been able to beat everything. What kind of dragon is this? Was I seeing things before? But the effect of the truth spell clearly shows that this is an underage blue dragon. He had no time to pay attention to the giant skull demon, Lang Go, who was shocked by the strange appearance of Keyes' dragon body. For a moment, the dragon fought in the wild. Chapter 69. The dragon fights in the wild, and its blood is black and yellow. Blood with charcoal and flames sprayed everywhere, but it did not flow out from the body of the raging dragon. Instead, it was caused by the serious injury of the burning Skywalker who attacked Keyes. Between the indigo scales were dark golden fascia, and the knotted muscles looked like they were about to burst out of the body. Its fangs and teeth were so sharp that they reflected light, and its eyes were like molten gold. It was embedded in a ferocious head that obviously had the characteristics of a blue dragon. The sour breeze in the air of the Acid Canyon Bitwall made Keyes feel a little comfortable. Ever since he entered Avernus from the Ash Bitwall, he had not returned to his true form many times. Now that he suddenly switched back from his human form, his body felt inexplicably more comfortable. Young blue dragon, although it was not appropriate to call such an obviously oversized Megalosaurus, it was fine for the time being. After all, our protagonist had only been born recently. Kryze clenched his own draconic claw, which he had just used to smash the head of the firewalker that had ambushed him. "This is power," he whispered in a low and concise draconic voice. "This power is really good." With a fierce wind, the Megalosaurus directly pounced on the enemy who dared to plot against him. In the body of a true dragon, the cognitive influence of self-denial that the giant skull demon constantly spread was completely eliminated. After all, the charm of the Megalosaurus was much higher than this deformed, ugly monster. Stop him. For the first time, the giant skull demon did not use its mental communication ability. Instead, it directly ordered the demon army under its command in the language of the abyss. Its sharp voice and the way the Hezru, which was connected to the animated chain, fell to the ground quickly showed the fear of the Obilus demon at this time. Uncontrollable fear shrouded the giant skull demon. Part of the reason was that it was affected by the Megalosaurus's natural deterrence, aura, which was also commonly known as dragon's aura. This demon, who was good at bewitching and controlling, was given a taste of its own medicine. Under the command of their creator, the remaining 3 gigantic skulls in the army stopped their evolution by devouring and flew into the sky. Lang Gu threw all kinds of magic items to the other demons as if he was celebrating 11-inch, boots of gale, ring of enlargement, scepter of secondary sound wave. Gigantic Skull remembered how to use these magical items or had completely forgotten their abilities. He took them out to arm his demon army, hoping to use the method of randomly beating the master to death to deal with the evil dragon that was spreading fear in the sky. Not only that, but Lang Gu had also recklessly used the flesh transplant technique, which was regarded as an art by the giant skull demons in the past and had never been operated without careful consideration. Under the pressure of survival, he created many living chains and used them to capture the Tana demons that had the ability to fly. He pulled over a Vrock's subordinate that was hovering at a low altitude, waiting for an opportunity to attack the Megalosaurus. He ignored the Tana demon's anger and begging, tore off its wings without mercy, and then transferred the wings to a 6-armed Naga. Similar situations happened continuously. The 6-armed Naga, with Vrock wings, and the Glabriza demon that was carried into the sky by the 6 pairs of Quasit wings were continuously thrown into the sky by this crazy demon leader. You said you can't fly? Then why don't you die? You said the position of the wings is wrong. Then why don't you die? Hurry up, all of you go to the sky, and report to that strange, evil dragon. The evil giant skull demon used its bewitching and controlling ability to constantly drive the Tana demons that he had forcibly modified, encouraging them to go to Keys and deliver their heads to him. Although this ancient Obilus demon had always prided itself on being rational, its chaotic and disorderly nature was exposed at this moment. Facing these demons that rushed over to deliver their heads, Keys decisively activated the newly mastered Inferno force field. The blazing hot field rippled out from within his body, pushing away these demons that attempted to climb onto his body from the inside out. For a moment, the demons that were ignited by the high temperature of the field turned into flying torches. Only the slightly stronger ones were lucky enough to escape death, but they were also severely burned. Swoosh smack! A tail whip lashed out at the 6-armed Naga that had used a high-level teleportation spell to rush to his side. This demon attempted to activate the blade barrier to cut Keys's body, but its plan did not succeed because the Vrom wings that the giant skull demon had randomly transplanted onto its chest disrupted its balance. To be honest, Keys was also a little tired at this time. He had just led the Batsu Devil's assault team to snipe the Firewalker, and then was besieged by a wave of demons. He had no choice but to give up hiding his strength and transform into a true dragon. Now he had to face so many demons, it would be a lie to say that he was not tired. There's no way to kill all the demons. Looking at the situation, there's still a large number of demons coming to this battlefield. The young blue dragon was not immersed in the wanton slaughter. Instead, he had a hint of vigilance in his heart. I have to end this quickly and settle these troubles. Thinking of this, Keys made up his mind and prepared to use a new ability that he had not fully mastered. The Megalosaurus had 3 standard ways of fighting: close combat, magic ability, and the innate ability to breathe. As a blue dragon, Keys' breath was originally a thunderbolt. This was very unfriendly, although it could still hurt the demon Tana by increasing the intensity and duration of its output. In the face of so many enemies who were immune to electric shock, it was tantamount to double the effort for half the result and not worth the loss. Fortunately, before being airdropped, Keys had fused with the essence of the old golden dragon, so that he had two additional breath abilities, weakening breath and flame breath. These two were the innate abilities of the golden dragon. As Keys's dragon egg had undergone the adaptive transformation of the ancient civilization, when it fused with the golden dragon's heart, there was a burst of passive evolution that was almost beyond the endurance of his body. Under the drive of this passive evolution, the inherited ability of the golden dragon's breath was naturally extraordinary. Keys had tried the flame breath once, but in the end, he had to cast the super regeneration spell on his scorched upper and lower jaw. He did not even try the weakening breath at all. Although he could not perfectly control this ability now, Keys had already conceived many other uses, such as the electric arc method, the regenerative oxygen blowing method, and so on. These were some of the very valuable experiments that he wanted to try in the future. But now, in the face of the threat of the demon army and the tactical target of the burning Skywalker, who could easily destroy the mercenary fortress from another dimension, Keys had to try to use the most primitive function of this innate ability: battle. This was a battle that would determine the outcome. Chapter 70. Taking a deep breath of the sour air, the young blue dragon grabbed the burning Skywalker with its claws and opened its mouth wide in an attempt to bite him. Then, the young blue dragon opened its mouth even wider. Throwing away the burning Skywalker that he had torn in half, Keys stared at the remaining two burning Skywalkers with his eyes that were like molten gold. He could already feel that these behemoths were gradually becoming stronger as they devoured the demon Tanari. As expected, just as Quest had predicted, the remaining two burning Skywalkers moved their massive bodies in the air and approached the slowly falling corpse of their own kind under the urging of their own instincts. Railgun! The young blue dragon had already swallowed the space belt that contained the remaining silver-containing armor-piercing bullets into his stomach when he transformed. This was how the Megalosaurus usually used magic items. At this time, the electric charge that was brewing in his body instantly surged. Under the effect of the strong electric field, these bullets formed a metal storm and shot out from the blue dragon's mouth toward the preset target. The initial speed of more than Mach 10 gave the bullets a powerful kinetic energy. The bullets tore through the air and became red hot due to the intense friction on the metal surface, leaving a bright red trail in the air. There was nowhere to hide. There was nowhere to run. The remaining two burning Skywalkers were instantly riddled with holes by the whistling cannonballs. The smallest wound on their bodies was the size of a wash basin. Most of the wounds penetrated the bodies of the two behemoths, causing penetrating damage. Roar! Roar! The burning Skywalkers let out deafening roars due to the indescribable pain. Hot and burning blood splashed everywhere. Sure enough, they're transformed from insects. Not all of them are dead. Quest sighed. However, this didn't delay his next wave of attacks. The best way to eradicate evil was to kill a completely dead demon, the young blue dragon, although it was a little inappropriate to call him that based on his body size. He would just call him that for the time being. Keys stirred up the energy in his body, allowing the heat to flow from his heart to his bones. He did his best to absorb the energy in order to launch the next attack. He was trying to restrain the weakening and fire breath abilities that he had inherited from the golden dragon at the same time, and unleash them on his opponents, the demon army. It was a battle method that he had never tried before. Therefore, he had to deceive and wound the two burning Skywalkers who might affect his ultimate move. Reality proved that his strategy was wise. Once the powerful energy was mobilized, there was a tendency to be uncontrollable. The young blue dragon was flying in the air, and his muscles were bulging and taut, as if he was a balloon that could burst at any time. The indigo scales on Keys's body opened up slightly, and he fell into a momentary state of rigidity. Fortunately, it was a daunting experience without any mishap in the end. It was a pioneering feat that even purebred gold dragons would find difficult to accomplish. The Acid Fog Canyon plain was not completely shrouded in darkness. The thick clouds of acidic gas in the sky would reflect or refract the light of the active volcanoes all over the plain, emitting a faint reddish-brown light. But at this moment, it was as if a sun had appeared in this place. The sun symbolized fire, light, destruction, and death. The blazing beam of light was surrounded by a weakening gas that could weaken life. It was like Sun Wukong swinging the golden cudgel, smashing hard on the heads of the demons that Keys was facing. There were no screams, no blood. These things that should have appeared were all evaporated and disappeared with the light. The young blue dragon tried his best to adjust the direction of his breath so that the beam of death plowed into the place where the Thanner demons gathered. At this time, this group of underworld creatures, who took pleasure in killing and glory in destruction, were all frightened. They mustered the last of their strength and scrambled to escape the ultimate killing and destruction brought by the beam of light. As the commander, the Colossus did not hesitate at all. This ancient species of Obilus chose to retreat more decisively than the other Thanner demons. He left a mirrored figure in an attempt to confuse Keys. His real body had already secretly opened a directional portal under his feet. This cunning commander of the demon army had set up a beacon for retreat before launching the attack. Fortunately, I prepared for both sides. It's better to be prepared. Lang Ge, who was very concerned about his image, just jumped out of the portal. He raised his deformed hands and brushed the dust on his body because of the shock wave. Yes, it's better to be prepared. A terrifying armor exuding strong magic fluctuations came in front of the Colossus through the portal that had not been completely closed. In the mercenary fortress from another dimension, the smoke of the battle gradually dissipated. Although the remaining demons were still attacking the city, it was no longer a big deal. Everyone witnessed the commander, Keys, returning to his megalosaurus form when he led the charge and broke through the enemy lines. Their hearts were much calmer. Perhaps among these people, except for the spellcasters who were usually well-learned, there were not many who could accurately assess the power of this young blue dragon's last attack, and how terrifying it was. But after all, the Megalosaurus was a creature that was well known in the multiverse. With such a strong person in charge, it would undoubtedly arouse the fighting spirit of these guys. Of course, not everyone was encouraged. At least, the former sacred samurai Jensen was not. In his opinion, this war was a meaningless fight between the evil camps, and the only possible meaning of its existence was to let as many evil creatures as possible destroy each other in this fight. The God of justice and law is above. I am in the abyss, and I have no choice. Only by doing my best to kill the enemy or be killed can I wash away my sins. Jensen repeatedly recited his prayer in his heart. As a condemned sacred samurai, he could only pray silently in the depths of his heart. He had to follow the maxim of silence. Before his sins were washed away, and he was redeemed, this former sacred samurai would no longer have the right to appeal and argue. Although his clothes were ragged and he could not speak, Jensen knew that he had not been abandoned by his faith. His arm that raised the shield to block was still as steady as before, and his strength when slashing with the sword seemed to be stronger than before. But even if this devout believer's faith was firm, he would still feel tired. He did not know how many times he had broken the demon's head, but his movements had also changed a little, and the damage to his weapon and equipment made him even more helpless. He could have a firm belief as support, but his weapon and equipment were not. Just as he once again blocked the claw attack of a timid demon squad captain, the shield he used to block suddenly shattered. This change caused the long sword that was originally thrust to be tightly grasped by the opponent, and at this moment, A sneak attack from a Babu demon that had been lurking for a long time came unexpectedly. Jensen struggled to pull back the long sword. He wanted to use the blade that was getting more and more chipped to block the thorns that were coming at him. This might work, or it might not. After all, this weapon seemed to be on the verge of completely shattering. "Hey boy, watch out." A soft reprimand in Inferno reached Jensen's ears. A figure with a ridiculous round hat flashed past him. The man used a pair of spiked gloves and directly smashed the attacker's head. This is not the place to be distracted. For this unexpected assistance, Jensen just nodded and did not directly thank him in words. This was not in line with the etiquette of the sacred samurai. Chapter 71. For the former Saint Samurai Jensen, faith was not only a form of worship for a god, but also a way of life. If others were to lend him a helping hand, he should be the first to thank them. But because of the shackles of the maxim of silence, Jensen could only hide these words in his heart and look forward to the future. If he had the chance, he would repay this debt. About half an hourglass had passed since the last demon that attacked the fortress was killed. Without the urging of the Batsu military police, the mercenaries from the other planes who participated in the defense of the fortress began to take turns to repair and reorganize their hard-won defense. Jensen's originally broken armor and weapons were completely destroyed in the last battle. Thus, he received some new supplies from the military supply department: a broad-bladed short sword, a round shield made of wrought iron, a half-body armor with a helmet, a spear more than 7 feet long, and a few throwing axes. These equipment were actually considered valuable military equipment in any material plane, but in the Batsu's fortress, they were only common goods. The demons have really swindled the wealth from all corners of the multiverse and poured it all into the bottomless pit of the blood war. Jensen, who was once a Saint Samurai, used oiled sandpaper to polish the edge of his weapon. Although Jensen's judgment was wrong, it was not completely unreasonable. For the creatures of the lower realms, although wealth was good food to satisfy the evil desire of greed, any Batsu with some ability would not refuse to collect wealth to show their strength and power. But to them, or perhaps to those demons in high positions, the philosophical confrontation between order and chaos was not only related to their strength, but also the meaning of their existence. Thus, in the blood war, the Batsu devil would never be stingy with their wealth. Moreover, most of the money was distributed to the middle and lower-ranked demons by their superiors. Being generous with other people's money, the demons naturally did not have any psychological burden. In fact, this was because Key's fortress was only a mercenary fortress from another plane. Some of the pure Batsu devil vanguards that were also airdropped into the Acid Fog Canyon plane actually had more ample supplies. However, the better the equipment, the more dangerous the opponent was. An army composed entirely of Batsu devil walked on the land of Acid Fog Canyon. They cautiously and swiftly traversed the terrain filled with ravines and hidden underground volcanoes. Unlike Keyes, who had airdropped the entire fortress into this plane, this vanguard of Bator adopted a mobile warfare strategy. Through constant movement, they carefully dealt with small groups of Dakri demons, not giving the enemy any chance to use their advantage in numbers to surround and annihilate them. The reason for this tactic was that the senior devil in charge of this troop was extremely familiar with it. He was once a god worshipped by a centaur tribe in an unknown country in ancient times. He was a tyrannical god. A tyrannical god was a relatively rare type of demon that did not have its own race. As spirits and existences worshipped by ignorant primitive mortals in the image of gods from the dark and ignorant era, these primitive gods were abandoned and forgotten when true gods and beliefs were born. Therefore, when hell opened its doors to them, these false gods gladly accepted the invitation and gift from the 9 hells and transformed into bats of demons. As a totem worshipped by the centaurs, this tyrannical god was like a centaur that had been magnified dozens of times. However, after experiencing Bader's gift, its original forehooves turned into curled beast claws, wings covered in scales grew out of its back, and two iconic horns that many Bats-a-Devil demons had grew out of its head. This commander was once a god worshipped by the centaur tribe in Bloodshed Land. Therefore, after joining Bator, he had to use his expertise in the corresponding field to repay the grace of the Nine Hells. As a being worshipped by mortals, every tyrannical god was always thinking about returning to the material plane with the power they had obtained in Bator and picking up the glory that had disappeared. However, such a wish required an equivalent exchange in Bator. Because of the venture capital of the 9 prisons of Bader, it was even more difficult for the tyrannical god to go to the material plane than other Bats-a-Devils, unless they could obtain enough merit points. The tyrannical god, who was leading the troop forward, was very excited at this time. According to the agreement signed with the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics and Security Bureau of Bader's First Layer territory, as long as they completed the current task of building Hell Fortress, they would accumulate enough merit points to return to the material plane. In order to ensure the successful completion of the agreement, the tyrannical god not only risked his life to come to the bottomless abyss, but also took out his long-accumulated wealth to recruit a group of powerful Batsu vassals, such as the Dinar demons and the blood-armored demons. He also equipped them with luxurious weapons and equipment. Even the scouts of this army were made up of some strong 6-legged scytheworms carefully selected from the 9 hells. As a false god of the centaur tribe's Bloodshed Land, this tyrannical god was very familiar with the fighting style that came and went like the wind. Therefore, after being teleported to Acid Fog Canyon, this Batsu army followed this style. First, the tireless 6-legged scytheworms covered in chitin shells would spread out to detect the situation on the marching route, and then the army completely composed of demons would pass through. If they encountered a small group of Tana re-demons, they would swarm forward and use their comparative advantage in numbers and combat power to quickly flatten the enemy. If they encountered a large group of demons, this Batsu army could also avoid them. After all, the tyrannical god was also a type of demon, and they all had the ability to analyze rationally. As long as this operation could successfully open Hellgate Fortress, it would be a great achievement. There was no need to fight to the death with the demons in the abyss. Sitting in the army and listening to the reports from the Scytheworm scouts one after another, the tyrannical god commander constantly adjusted the marching route on the precious map in his hand. At the same time, he was also paying attention to the steel chariot pulled by hundreds of iron-armored demons in the middle of the army. The steel chariot was built by the tyrannical god, and its purpose was to serve as the foundation of Hellgate Fortress. Inside, dozens of spellcasters were taking turns to chant spells and other preparatory work day and night. This was already the 7th day. So far, there were less than 3 days before Hellgate Fortress would completely connect with Avernus and establish a stable spatial passage. Stroking the scepter in his hand, the tyrannical god was already imagining the wonderful scene of returning to the material plane and reclaiming his glory and being worshipped by millions. Fortunately, I was willing to spend money to purchase the topographic map of this plane from the great merchant Ugros. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to pull such a large Hellgate Fortress through the abyss. Chapter 72. Acid Fog Canyon, the 479th level of the abyss. Due to the tyrant worm's creation of the acid fog worms, it had transformed the environment of this plane, which was originally soaked in strong acid, into some vitality. However, the cracked land and the dense acid fog still affected the steel chariots that were moving quickly. Every 2 days, the chariot, which carried dozens of spellcasters and Hellgate Fortress, had to change its worn wheels and tires regularly. A group of imps, under the supervision of the Gore-Fiend, were repairing the chariot while smearing the Batsu Devil's acid-resistant blood on all the parts of the chariot to isolate it from the acid fog. The demons' vision was far superior to that of mortals, so they could see that in the distance there were scattered Tana re-demons that had begun to gather and observe the situation of the troops. Fortunately, the Scytheworm Scouts and the Invisible Tana's quick response team had already gone to deal with these loose ends. The commander only needed to wait for their good news. However, the tyrant god was not careless. He knew that this was actually the most dangerous moment for the mobile troops. Previously, when the chariot was being repaired, there were 2 encounters with the demons that had gathered. It was only because of the large number of high-grade demons in the troop that they were able to wipe out the enemy. The tyrant god used a dark abode, spell-like ability once a day to create a temporary command post for himself. Walking in, he took out a scroll map that he had bought from the skin of the Tana re-demons and studied it carefully. According to the Yugoloth, this map is one of the safer routes that they had explored in the course of their trade. However, there are too many worms in this level, and the laws of the entire plane are leaning towards these life forms. It's not just the abyssal creatures, but also the lower-level demons will become targets if they are not careful. The tyrant god commander's thick fingers tapped on the steel desk that was covered with scrolls. Every tap was like the sound of a hammer hitting an anvil. Seeing that the troops had been moving for nearly 8 days, the disadvantages of abandoning the land of Avernus and engaging in guerrilla warfare showed. Most of the low-grade demons could not violate the worm law of this plane, and their bodies had begun to show signs of being parasitized by the acid fogworms. The situation wasn't serious at the moment, but that was only because the tyrant god and other high-ranked devils had gathered together, and the Order of Bartho had suppressed the spread of the parasites. The commander of the tyrannical divine demons was very worried that if they were besieged by more Tanakis in the next 2 days, once the losses of the intermediate and senior demons reached a critical threshold, the outbreak of the worm parasitism crisis among the lower demons would very likely be the last straw that broke the camel's back. We have to solve this problem. After all, we're already at the final stage of this quest. We can't afford to make any mistakes. Tyrannical divine demon stroked his chin, thinking of various possible solutions. A demon fly acting as a signaler disrupted the commander's train of thought. The demon fly, which looked like a child, seemed to be a combination of a fat human baby and a giant fly that had its fill of blood. As it flew through the gates of the evil abode, it was immediately captured by a force field spell cast by the tyrannical demon. The high-ranked devil, whose thoughts were interrupted, was naturally very angry, but he didn't kill the demon fly in front of him. At least, he wouldn't do so before he saw the image transmitted by the demon fly. The demon fly could record everything it saw through a spell-like ability called the Eye of Hell, and then transmit the image to other creatures. This was also the most important thing for all who endured the annoying buzzing in their hearts to enslave the demon. The image transmitted by the demon fly made the tyrannical divine demon, who was lying behind the desk, stand up on all fours. Previously, Adina and a group of scythe insectoids had formed a rapid response team to hunt down the demons who had gathered to watch the Batsu's army. But who would have thought that the 2 demons sent by the enemy would be so easy to kill? The 2 demons seemed to be made up of an unknown number of entangled acid mistworms, and the tyrannical divine demon recognized them. They were 2 groups of cataclysmic worms. However, this was rather abnormal. According to the information he'd traded with the Yugoloths, while the cataclysmic worms were a type of powerful Tana re-demon that could deal with the scythe insectoids, it was too difficult for them to attack and kill Adina, even if 2 groups of cataclysmic worms attacked at the same time. The tyrannical divine demon had spent a lot of money to recruit these Dinah, and these high-ranked Batsa devils were in preparation for becoming pit fiends. They were the elites of the elites, and the most outstanding of them were even given the domineering title of Overlord Demon. For the first time, the tyrannical divine demon wanted to listen to the buzzing of the demon fly's messenger. He wanted to hear more about the image in detail. However, his thoughts were once again in vain. From the Batsu's temporary camp, the unique roar of the blood-armored fiends could be heard. When the tyrannical divine demon rushed out of the command post, the scene made his eyes pop out of their sockets. The heavily protected steel chariots had been overturned, and the Hell's Gate fortress on them had collapsed into a pile of ruins. The flesh of the lowly demons, one of the main ingredients, was like canned fruit that had been knocked over and scattered all over the ground, covering the ravines of the Valley of Acid Fog. The instigator of all this was now standing in front of hundreds of blood-armored fiends that had already gone mad. His casual attitude was infuriating. "Kill this Tana re-bastard for me." The tyrannical divine demon didn't actually need to give the order. The blood-armored fiends launched a swift attack as soon as they formed up. Those in the front raised their spears and pierced forward, while those in the back used their energy crossbows that could shoot. Hell's forced to harass the enemy. As the devils of Bator, who hated the Tana, re-raced the most the moment the blood-armored fiends and demons met, it would only end when one side was completely annihilated. Not only that, but the other high-ranked devils in the camp, like the Dinah, also spontaneously joined the ranks of those who dared to trespass into Bator's camp. For a moment, the spirit of unity, which shouldn't exist in the underworld, erupted among the soldiers of this army. The tyrannical divine demon, who was completely enraged by the unforeseen event, also brazenly attacked. This huge Batsa devil's claws soared into the air, and it flapped its slightly smaller wings and flew toward the enemy. At this moment, the commander seemed to have returned to the time when he was worshipped as the god of war by the Centaur tribe. He resolutely launched a charge toward his target. In the face of all kinds of attacks that came like raindrops, this guy who had single-handedly killed his way into Batsu's camp said calmly, "Command, mass deterrence." As soon as he finished speaking, the command spell seemed to form a substantial ripple that spread to half of the camp in the blink of an eye. All the creatures within this range were forced to use their willpower to resist. If they didn't succeed, they would enter a state of shock and stupefaction. Most of the blood-armored fiends who were closest to the spell directly fell into a state of shock because of this sentence. Chapter 73. As a former false god, the tyrant god was immune to the effects of the law intimidation. Some of the more powerful Huna demons were also released from the state of awe. They were only slightly affected by it. However, the other Batsu in the camp were not so lucky. Most of the devils had fallen into a sluggish state and could only rely on the power of their souls to break free of the restraints on their bodies. Those who were lucky enough to escape had their strength greatly reduced due to the difference between their souls and their bodies. "Who art thou?" The enraged tyrant god commander attempted to use the call to disturb his opponent while waving the two-headed spear he usually used as a scepter at the terrifying enemy without hesitation. The two-headed spear's attack did not work. A force field palm appeared out of thin air and blocked the Batsu commander's attack. The tyrant god recognized this spell, Bigby's grappling palm, to be able to casually cast a 7th grade spell. With a force field that was comparable to his full-powered attack, the enemy was a powerful spellcaster that could not be underestimated, regardless of whether he was a warlock or a wizard. "I am Hemtar, the second body of a dragon, the enemy who easily blocked the tyrant god's attack," said calmly. Sudden shock was an apt description of the former false god's feelings at this moment. The tyrant god was not an ignorant person. In fact, from the fact that he was willing to spend a large sum of money to purchase a relatively safe route from the merchants of Yugros, one could see how much importance he attached to the intelligence-gathering work of this military operation. Hemtar, an independent, intelligent organ that the tyrant worm had named after its creator, had long been included in the Abyssal Expedition Memorandum by the tyrant worm, although there was not much reliable information about it. Just the fact that it was a part of the body of the tyrant worm, which was as powerful as a true god, was enough to prove the degree of threat this Hemtar posed. Even if the tyrant god was once a false god, his authority could not compare to the demon lord, who ruled over an entire level of the Acid Fog Canyon. Moreover, this was an away battle in the enemy's territory. The Batsu commander immediately understood the contents of the message sent by the Fly Devil. The complete annihilation of the scout team, led by the Quanas, was probably due to this person in front of him. Of course, since things had already turned out this way, the tyrant god had no reason to sit still and wait for death. Moreover, there was no such thing as surrendering on the bloody battlefield, and there was no preferential treatment among the devils and demons. He could only use all his strength to fight for a way out. But what puzzled him was that after nearly 8 days of rapid march, he had clearly verified the safety of the Yugros trade route. So why did such a deadly second body of a dragon suddenly appear out of nowhere? He was puzzled, but there was no time to think about it, because after Helmeter introduced himself, he began to attack fiercely like a storm. Due to being nourished by the power of faith of the Centaur tribe, the tyrant god had a great advantage in both damage resistance and immunity compared to other Batsu devils. Most tyrant gods were easily immune to the damage caused by cold, electric, flame, poison, and sound waves. Therefore, Hemtar's tactic against this great demon was to first use a field spell to compress its space of movement, and at the same time use field control spells such as Petrification Ray, Weakening Curse, and Anti-Magic Ray to weaken the defensive advantage of the idle armor on the surface of the opponent's body. Then, through the Summoning Pagoda, he dealt with the other Batsu devils that swarmed over and did not let himself fall into a state of being pincered. Although Hemtar's tactic was simple, it was extremely efficient. Although he had now come to the camp of a Batsu devil army alone, it should be noted that this camp was in the Acid Fog Canyon of the Bottomless Abyss. Thus, when a demon lord's avatar activated the Summoning Pagoda, the demons that responded quickly neutralized the tyrant god camp's advantage in numbers. Most of the blood-armored fiends had just recovered from the effects of the intimidation of order, and they had to rush around to put out the fire. They used spells similar to dimensional anchors to prevent the demons from rushing in after responding to the summons. They had not even truly fought the enemy that had caused all this, and they had no choice but to withdraw from the battle between the higher-ups. This situation made these Batsu soldiers who had dedicated their lives to bloody battles extremely angry, but there was nothing they could do. The only ones who could help the commander of the tyrant god camp were the Hornas that had been recruited at a high price. This group of Batsu elites were the elites of the elites, and the strength that they had constantly trained to become pit fiends was finally put to use. They were extremely brave warriors, and would rarely choose to retreat, even in the face of a powerful enemy. The glory of killing an Abyssal Lord's avatar motivated them to fearlessly brandish their spikes and chains as they charged through the air. However, there were 2 other uninvited guests of the Thanner, blocking their path of charge. If the tyrant god had looked carefully, he would have realized that these 2 pagodas were the 2 calamity bugs that had annihilated the scout team. These 2 calamity bugs were not ordinary calamity bugs. They had been born even earlier than the dragon's secondary body, Hemtar. They were primitive creatures created by the tyrant worm and were the source of all calamity bugs. If one looked carefully, they would be able to see some clues from the color of their bodies. The acid mist worms that made up the bodies of these two cataclysmic worms had a rather obvious structure, and the color of their bodies was closer to the dark brown skin of the worm tyrant. Not only did they possess physical strength far surpassing their peers, but they also possessed the body structure of an artisan that could store magical power. My name is Bug Legion because we have the numbers. Come into my bowl, you flying bighorn goats. Where do we have a bowl? Shut up. Why don't you just eat it, just like what you did before? Ha 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 ha, seconded. Seconded. The calamity bugs' bodies were constantly transmitting the words of the acid mist worms. It was as if they were responding to the purest law of chaos in the abyss, and they had become even more powerful. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several acid mist worms that were rooted in the bodies of these demons shot out like sharp swords. Most of them pierced through the bodies of the calamity bugs that were dodging the potions. Although this attack couldn't kill a greater devil, the two groups of calamity bugs were like fishing lines being reeled in. They dragged the dreadnought devils, who had their hearts pierced, to the ground of the acid fog canyon. During this period, the victims all swung their weapons, either slashing or poking at the worm's fishing line that caused great damage to them. However, only a few of them were able to achieve the desired effect. Most of the weapons of the Hunad demons were repelled by the tough and slimy worm's skin and did not have any effect. The calamity bugs that were dragged down came into close contact with the ground and fell to the ground. I'll kill you while you're down. Don't let the wrong one go. Slaughter these flying bighorn goats. The cataclysmic swarm would not let go of the opportunity to beat the enemy while they were down. Just like Orochimaru's hidden shadow multiple snake hand in Naruto, an unknown number of acid mist worms gushed out of the cataclysmic swarm and attacked the Kunonaji victims who were dragged to the ground. These acid mist worms were responsible for scaring, restraining, attacking, and so on. They were able to achieve a multi-hit combo, and the calamity bugs that were tangled with them could only grind against the ground. Naturally, the calamity bugs that were still in the air would not give up resisting just because their companions were in trouble. Instead, this angered the Batsu elites. They used lightning bolts and fireballs to attack their enemies, while also using their phantoms to interfere with the calamity bugs' senses. However, no matter what, these calamity bugs were successfully restrained by the two first-generation calamity bugs. At the same time, the tyrannical deity commander could only face the battle with the dragon's subbody, Hemtar, alone. A total of 4 giant force field hands blocked off all the tyrannical deity commander's movements. At this time, he did not even dare to use the strategy of leaping into the air to attack the enemy, because that might fall right into the trap of the demon lord's evil clone, and he would be in an even more passive situation. Risking being hit by a few debuff spells, the tyrannical deity commander used all his strength to break through a summoned Bigby Palm with his double-headed spear and jumped out of the encirclement. He waited for an opportunity and used his war priest domain ability to summon a wave of divine power to attack the troublesome enemy. As a former false god of the bloodshed domain, he knew how important it was to seize the initiative in battle and let the enemy fall into his own rhythm. Therefore, the Batsu commander had no intention of stopping or retreating. While the dragon's subbody was busy resisting the divine power and had no time to care about anything else, the tyrannical deity commander buffed his double-headed spear with enchanted weapon and flame strike. With a leap, he stabbed the extremely dangerous weapon into the body of a rampaging calamity bug. Only by getting rid of these two troublesome fellows and having the calamity bugs cooperate with him could he possibly resist the abyssal lord's subbody. While the first-generation calamity bugs were certainly outstanding in combat, they could not match the tyrannical deity commander in a one-on-one fight, not to mention that the latter had the advantage of ambushes. Thus, when the twin-headed spear that was emitting sparks due to the buff of the spell was stuffed into the body of the fiend worm, the lively swarm of calamity worms was instantly blown into countless pieces. The other calamity bugs that were scared out of their wits not only had to fend off an attack from the tyrannical deity commander that had activated its peerless form, but also a large group of calamity bugs that attacked with hatred. It only took a moment for the calamity bugs to walk down the same path as its companions and be torn apart by the furious Batsu Devil. However, when the tyrannical deity commander and the calamity bugs turned their weapons to their powerful opponent, Helmuter, they found that the Abyssal Lord had already recovered from the divine power attack and was even watching with great interest as the tyrannical deity commander and his calamity bugs were wiped out. Not a bad ambush, tyrannical deity commander. But do you know why I can only stand here? Before the demon lord's clone could finish speaking, a gigantic maw tore through the cracked earth of the acid fog canyon and swallowed the tyrannical deity commander and most of his subordinates. The earth beneath the dragon's body continued to bulge as a huge tongue as thick as the neck of a megalosaurus connected to Helmuter's feet and lifted him out of the maw's range. Because I never had freedom either. Ha 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 ha. The tyrannical deity commander was dead. The Batsu Devil that had gone to the material plane to recover its past glory, along with the Batsu Expeditionary Army that carried its power to realize its dream, had become snacks in the tyrant worm's mouth. Chapter 74. Acid Fog Canyon, Bartholomew's Mercenary Fortress. Keyes looked at the dissected demon body on the dissection table and fell into deep thought. One of the benefits of being a young blue dragon was that he was much bolder. Keyes would have been scared out of his wits if he was still the programmer he used to be, let alone being able to do the research himself. After the continuous battles with the Thanner re-demons, Ogre Shaman Palu had more research materials in his hands. Although the demons in the lower realm were all spirit and body as one, most of the time, when they were destroyed, their bodies would immediately rot and die. But as if to prove the chaotic nature of the bottomless abyss, there would always be some exceptions, especially when the bloody battle broke out and thousands of demons died in the battle. This situation was not uncommon. Ogre Palu, who always had potions, was not as smart as Brew, nor as strong as Brew, but compared to his two brothers, he was calmer and more dependable. Not only had he fully inherited the voodoo techniques from the trolls, but he had also developed them through continuous study. Thanks to the system's knowledge of demon anatomy obtained in Avernus, the demons had done this kind of work many times. Palu could skillfully use a foot-long scalpel to cut and separate the flesh and blood of the tough Thanner re-demons. A large number of fresh materials had been obtained in the recent battles, which gave him the opportunity to use his knowledge of voodoo to research and develop new types of potions. These three demons are Vrock, Bugala, and Dretch. They are also the Thanner re-race's biological samples that we have obtained the most besides the acid fogworms. Palu picked up the sterilized scalpel and wiped it on his leather apron to remove the residual alcohol on it. He pointed at the dissected specimens one by one. Through the physiological dissection of at least 100 of these creatures, I found that although the Thanner re-demons have different appearances and internal organs, even if they are of the same type, there are slight differences in their individual structures, but there is a common organ or tissue inside their bodies. Palu used the scalpel to cut the demon's limbs that were fixed to the dissection table by long nails. The silver-plated thin blade easily tore open the skin and muscles that were no longer tough due to death. Palu had done the same job many times, so he seemed to be at ease. The sharp vision of a megalosaurus allowed Keyes to clearly see the lymphatic structure inside the incision made by the ogre voodoo doctor. However, the color of the lymphoid tissue of this Tana re-demon was very similar to the surrounding muscle tissue. It was like a wriggling earthworm covering its entire body. If not specifically pointed out, it would be easily overlooked. These lymphoid tissue-like structures are also present in the low-level acid mist worms. Paru immediately dissected another acid mistworm that was still alive, as if he had seen through Quitha's guess. Then he explained, "In the voodoo technique I inherited, there's a kind of knowledge about how to perform a bloodline curse. The key to successfully performing it is to first find the bloodline commonality of the target of the curse. Therefore, I guess this is the bloodline commonality of the Tanaree race." That's a very good idea. Extremely sharp observation skills and practical skills. Snyder, who had just finished the work assigned by Keyes, couldn't help but praise Paulu after hearing his explanation. This Demolic had always been very enthusiastic about various research works. He didn't have any prejudice against Paulu's views just because he was an ogre that the drows didn't think highly of. Keyes also somewhat agreed with the ogre voodoo doctor's point of view, but he still had some doubts. As a creature of the underworld, in fact, life doesn't need the support of any body organs to exist. The concept of existence itself is the basis of its existence. We have also discovered through previous dissections that some demons have digestive organs such as intestines, but they don't have excretory organs. Therefore, they don't swallow food to maintain their lives, but simply to satisfy their body's desire for flesh and blood. Moreover, even if they are the same kind of Tanaree demon, their internal organs may not be exactly the same. Their various organs are like fillers that are randomly created. Then, what is the special function of this universal tissue or organ? The question hit the nail on the head, and Paru snapped his fingers excitedly, signaling everyone to calm down. He wanted to use the experiment to tell everyone the answer to his discovery. The ogre voodoo doctor transformed into a skilled anatomist. He first cut the smallest dretch specimen on the dissection table and meticulously separated the muscles on the arm of this weak Tanaree demon from the demon lymph hidden in it. Then he completely removed the demon lymph that existed in the living acid mistworm that had been skinned, leaving only a small part connected to the brain. Finally, he implanted the demon lymph in the arm of the dretch into the body of the worm. Just as he was about to ask for help, the Demolic Snyder, who had been watching the experiment for a long time, cast an elementary restoration on the worm. Under the effect of the restoration spell, the experimental carrier implanted with a part of the dretch's demon lymph quickly recovered its vitality that was gradually dissipating due to the dissection. This casting a healing spell like elementary restoration required the caster to continuously expend magic power. To a Demolic, this loss was simply insignificant. But this top-level undead creature, who was a master of magic control, immediately noticed a trace of abnormality. Casting such a spell on the worm seemed to consume a little more magic power. Snyder immediately got the answer he wanted. The acid worm that was fixed with a long nail on the dissection table was healed by the restoration spell, and this was not all. The dretch's demon lymph tissue had an effect. The worm's body was constantly twisting and twisting. Its original body was constantly expanding, and the lich's excess restoration energy provided energy for this process. A new characteristic was reflected on its body. The body of the worm gradually turned into the shape of a demon's arm. From its color and size, it was very similar to the arm of the dretch. The ogre witch doctor was very satisfied with the results of his experiment. He took the worm out of the nail and threw it to the Demolic Snyder, who had a new body. The first Tanaree demons were produced after the ancient Obilus lords threw the fallen souls of mortals into the abyssal blood pool. Most of the Tanaree demons were originally abyssal worms, a type of worm that looked very similar to the acid mist worms. These worms then accumulated energy by devouring each other, and the energy they accumulated drove them to evolve abnormally, thus producing all kinds of Tanaree demons. In theory, All Tana Re demons used the same set of evolutionary templates, but because of the different souls that fell into the abyss, they evolved in different directions. Through this experiment, I can draw the following conclusion. The evolutionary template in the demons never disappeared, but it was passed down as a common bloodline. At the same time, the dominant part was carried by the demon's lymphatic tissue, which affected the appearance and ability of various demons. Chapter 75. Not only did Peru's experiment prove his conjecture, but it also proved that one could not judge a book by its cover. Even among the ogres, who were known for their stupidity, there were still individuals as extraordinary as the three of them. Mr. Peru, how can your research help us in our current situation? The goblin Renaz was the one who asked the question. This goblin great engineer was different from Snade, who was also a researcher. He was more rational and focused on the practical aspects of his research. Peru seemed to have expected this question. He took out 2 to 3 materials from his potion pouch and took out some demon lymph from the Vrok's body on the dissection table. Then, as he softly chanted a voodoo spell that others could not even pronounce, he weighed the proportions of the ingredients he took out before putting them together with the Vrok's demon lymph into a crystal bowl beside him. He then crushed them and mixed them well. Please help me hold that mutated acid mistworm in place, Peru said to Snade, who had just received the mutated acid mistworm and was carefully inspecting it. Snade readily accepted the request. He admired the ogre voodoo doctor's meticulous work and was naturally willing to be an assistant for this experiment. With just a snap of his fingers, an invisible force field claw firmly bound the experimental subject and slowly moved it closer to Peru so that he could conduct the experiment. After nodding to express his gratitude, the ogre voodoo doctor once again chanted a voodoo spell while moving his hands according to a certain rhythm. Following his voice and movements, the mixture that he had mixed into powder immediately turned into a cloud of thick fog. Under Peru's command, this cloud of fog shrouded the mutated acid mistworm. Then, something shocking happened. The experimental mannequin's form changed again. The acid mistworm that was shrouded in the fog of the potion, which had already grown a Dretch's forearm, was squeezed back into its body like clay. At the same time, wart-like protrusions that could only be found under the Vrok's feathers that were used to produce spores slowly appeared on the unlucky experimental subject. However, perhaps because there was not enough energy to support it, or because the total amount of substances in the potion was not enough to induce its evolution, the evolution of this acid mistworm had just begun to stagnate. Not only that, but due to the Demolika's restoration spell, the vitality of the experimental body had greatly increased. But now, the acid mistworm, which had fallen into a stagnant state of evolution, began to show a large number of wrinkles all over its skin due to dehydration, and it also emitted a decaying smell that only old creatures would have. This was very abnormal in itself. The demons of the lower realm, as beings of spirit and body, theoretically would never naturally age. Ogre Voodoo Dr. Peru looked at the results of his experiment with satisfaction. He explained to everyone, "I used a voodoo poison that is often used to stimulate the bloodline potential of living creatures. However, the rate of effectiveness of this potion is actually very low. It was originally developed by my troll teacher in order to increase the strength of the tribe. However, among the newborn cubs that were fed the medicine, this medicine only had a slight effect on the 3 of us brothers." Peru's expression became slightly gloomy when he mentioned his teacher, who had selflessly taught him his skills. He put down the tools in his hand and picked up the troll skull staff that was placed next to him. He paused for a moment before continuing. "In fact, the reason why this potion is not very successful is because it lacks a guiding material, a genetic material that can be compatible with the blood of the user, but also belongs to a higher level of life. The demon lymph of the rock is a very good material to guide the evolution of an acid mist worm. At this point, there was no need to go into details. At this moment, everyone present was far more intelligent than mortals, and they quickly caught up with Paru's train of thought. For ordinary demons, evolving to a higher level of life was their lifelong pursuit. For them, this was not only a desire for strength, but also a necessity to carry out their will to destroy. Whether it was the weak Dretch or the powerful Bela, they were all under the influence of the abyss will to constantly seek to increase their strength and practice more crazy methods of destruction. However, the evolution of demons could not go against the law of conservation of energy. The will of the abyss could not let them create something out of nothing. Only by accumulating enough strength could demons successfully evolve to a higher level of life. This was one of the remaining laws of order in the chaotic abyss. The purpose of Paru's potion was to induce the acid mist worm as an experimental subject to enter a state of evolution. However, the worm itself lacked the energy needed to complete the evolution, so it overdrafted its own life force and became half dead. Of course, inducing demons to evolve could create more powerful demons in other abyss levels. However, due to the worm law of the acid mist canyon, almost all the demons that lived here were parasitized by the acid mist worms. Most of the power that the demons painstakingly accumulated for a long time was stolen by the parasites. After the evolution, there would not be enough accumulation to complete the evolution process. Therefore, there was no better place than here to use this voodoo potion as a biological weapon. If a higher-level demon lymph was used as a guiding material, Paru could modify it and create a new potion. It could be used on a large scale in the future battlefield. It was very likely that they could defeat the attacking demon army without shedding a drop of blood. Although he had only experimented on the Thanner Re-demons and did not use the ancient Obilus demons or the immaterial Lomala demons as supplementary materials, the effects of Paru's potion were already very shocking. After all, the demon army of the abyss was mostly made up of countless Thanner Re-demons. As for the problem of the materials needed to create the potion on a large scale, as for the other materials, the Demolik Snade was in charge of the fortress. Keys could order him to open the Otherworld Gate or communicate with the dimensional merchants, and obtain them through trade. He could even use the limited Wish Spell and Wish Spell to solve some of the requirements. These were not a problem. Only the demon lymph could be obtained from the few demon corpses that could be preserved from the battlefield. Therefore, Keys did not intend to use the tactic of adding fuel to the fire. The biological weapon that Para developed could be used at a specific time to determine the outcome of the battle. The Blue Dragon youth thought for a moment. After making up his mind, he asked, "Para, what is the name of the troll who taught you voodoo skills?" After hearing Keys's question, the ogre voodoo doctor thought for a moment and shook his head. He seemed a little disappointed. The old troll did not have a name. It was only because he would always make a rumbling sound when cooking ingredients and mixing potions that the children in the tribe would call him Grandpa Rumble. Then this potion shall be called the Rumble Potion. Chapter 76. While Keys and the others were researching how to use the secret weapon, the potion, to surprise the demon army that was about to surround the fortress, Ogre Brew, who had been entrusted with an important task by the commander of the Bartho mercenary fortress, was busy preparing for other war necessities. More and more injured soldiers began to return to the battlefield medical camp that was very characteristic of the Hell of Bartho, thanks to the unremitting efforts of the wizards and evil priests. Although the elemental prosthetics made by the spellcasters were not that easy to use and would slowly affect the consciousness of the mercenaries from the material plane, these soldiers who did not have the regenerative ability of the demons would be able to pick up their weapons again. This way, the resources of the fortress would not be wasted. The fortress's defense system had revealed some problems when the firewalkers' air attack failed. The fortress had no way to effectively counter attacks from the air. It was too dangerous for the commander, the young blue dragon, to lead the elite Batsa-Devil as a suicide squad. Who knew what kind of monster was hiding in the demon army? Secondly, it would create a vacuum of high-level combat power. If not for Snade's sneak attack, the wolf-snake devil warlord could have caused more damage in the fortress. To solve this problem, the ogre blacksmith Nalu, under the guidance of the great goblin engineer Riknaz, used the best materials to create many giant crossbows in the workshop of the fortress. After that, the spellcasters engraved various magical effects on the crossbows, such as gravity arrays and explosion arrays. The grooves were also filled with silver powder. Once the specially made crossbow bolts were fired, these arrangements would take effect the moment they hit the target. The floating beasts that posed a great threat to the fortress's defense system would immediately repeat the tragedy of the Hindenburg if they were hit. Of course, after the war machine known as the Bartho Mercenary Fortress was put into operation, they had made far more preparations. As the saying went, winning a war depends on weapons, and winning a war depends on the soldiers. If the army was a melting pot, then the army on the battlefield was the largest melting pot in the multiverse. Most of the defenders of the fortress were warriors that the devils had recruited from various material planes. These people had different appearances, spoke languages that they could not understand, and had different customs and habits. But in the big furnace that was the fortress, they were growing at an astonishing speed. Not only did slaying the demons hone their combat skills, the bloody battle also urged them to constantly learn new things. For example, when these people were first sent to this camp, only an extremely small number of them could grasp the purgatory language. However, in less than 10 days, most of the surviving mercenaries were able to speak a few sentences in the language of the lower realms. As for understanding simple orders, it was a piece of cake. Perhaps these people had different occupations before coming here. Some were rangers, some were barbarians, and some were rogues. But at this moment, they only had one identity: soldiers. Soldiers who fought with their lives on the line in order to survive this bloody battle. Perhaps due to the influence of the rules of the 9 prisons of Bader, these soldiers spontaneously formed combat teams under the rules of their respective organizations. They cooperated with each other to better resist the invading demons on the battlefield. This choice was not out of loyalty. In fact, the army of the 9 prisons of Bader had never advocated everyone for themselves, an eye for everyone. The cooperation between the soldiers was only for themselves so that they would not be attacked from both sides, and so that they would have a greater chance of survival. Therefore, every soldier carefully made friends with comrades who were beneficial to their survival. The rule of the strong wins was now the accepted standard of this choice. Our broom brows, Dalton was one of the best. Not only were his former subordinates, who had survived several major battles, some of the other soldiers also liked to gather under him and listen to his orders. As for Jason, the former paladin who was now paying debts on the battlefield, he was also well liked by some soldiers because of his excellent fighting skills and his clean and efficient way of slaying demons. However, unlike Dalton, Johnson had never promised to protect anyone. First, it was because of the maxim of silence. Second, this sinful paladin, who Dalton thought was very similar to Dalton's son, stubbornly believed that he was not worthy of shouldering anyone's expectations. Only by cleansing himself of his mistakes and becoming a paladin again would he be qualified. However, his lack of initiative and irresponsible attitude would occasionally infuriate some of the soldiers who were already difficult to deal with. You really don't know what's good for you. I only recommended you to join Ferguson's team because I thought highly of you. However, before he could finish his sentence, a large palm slapped the back of the ranger's head. This ranger was suspected to be a mix of Darrow-Dwarven bloodline. Without any resistance, this troublesome soldier fell to the ground in a daze. "Sorry, he was too loud and disturbed me," Dalton explained to Jason, who was looking at him. No one objected, not even the other members of Ferguson's team, who came with the paladin. After all, this was Barthol's mercenary fortress from another plane. Dalton was a tough nut to crack. After several battles, he had established his authority in this fortress. Not to mention, he also had to deal with his subordinates who were waiting for orders. No one would stand up for a paladin who looked like a half-baked paladin. As if he hadn't had enough, Dalton bent down and picked up the paladin's weapon. It was a heavy lacquered longbow made of purple wood and 5 feet long when it wasn't strung. Pulling it could shoot an arrow at least 200 paces away. At close range, it could easily pierce through armor. The arm of the longbow was very smooth, indicating that it had been used for many years. The body of the longbow was evenly coated with heavy lacquer, making it very suitable for maintaining its elasticity in the wet rainforest. Overall, it was well maintained and could be considered a valuable item. Although Broom Eyebrows wasn't an expert in archery, he was still a veteran in his own right. He gently pulled the longbow a few times. He was afraid that he would damage the weapon if he pulled too hard. Satisfied, he threw the longbow to one of his subordinates who also used archery. "This bow is okay. We need to find a good home for it. Besides, it's not convenient for such a short guy to use such a long bow." "Ha ha ha." As Dalton spoke, he mockingly gestured at the paladin's height. His subordinates and the surrounding soldiers burst into laughter. Jason glanced at Dalton and didn't say anything. He quietly got up and grabbed the paladin, who was lying on the ground. Then he put the paladin on his shoulder and walked out of the crowd. Judging from the direction he was heading, he should be heading for the field medical camp. "Boss, that kid doesn't know what's good for him," one of Dalton's subordinates whispered beside him. Dalton turned around and gave him a fierce glare. He looked at Jason's back and sighed slightly. "He's just like that paladin kid," Dalton cursed inwardly. Chapter 77. The Worsnake Demon Warlord died here. A spellcaster wearing a starry robe made of mithril stood at the edge of a forest far away from the Bardo Planar Fortress. He didn't even turn his head as he asked one of the first-generation Cataclysm bugs standing behind him as an attendant. The spellcaster was standing on the boundary between the Avernus soil and the Acid Fog Canyon, which had been teleported here together with the Bardo Planar Fortress. The soil in front of him emitted an exceptionally rich aura of the Nine Hells natural order. This powerful spellcaster born in the abyss felt a sense of disgust from the bottom of his heart. Helmet, the dragon's subbody, didn't sneak in alone like he did against the tyrannical god Legion not long ago. He didn't directly find the commander of the Bardo Planar Fortress and destroy it. He asked the attendant of the Cataclysm bugs, which he rarely did, in hopes of getting some advice. However, communicating with a creature that was born with schizophrenia meant that he wouldn't get a satisfactory answer. "Lord Deputy, it's not just the Worsnake Demon Warlord. The giant skull advisor Langer also died here." "How could Langer die so easily?" That's right. I heard that he cast a cloning spell on himself. Maybe he's already resurrected." That's right. Maybe the Worsnake demon also died and escaped. Those who refuse to accept a tyrant's descendant aren't reliable. Even in front of the terrifying dragon's subbody, the Cataclysm bugs couldn't change their habit of talking. However, Helmet didn't feel any anger. Perhaps he just wanted to find someone to chat with to relieve the boredom of waiting. What he had been waiting for had only arrived after he had listened to the Scourge Swarm's endless conspiracy for a while. a few strange pink-skinned acid fog worms crawled out of the ground around Helmet. The communication worms had already arrived. Unlike the previous cataclysm bugs that had been turned into living specimens, Helmet could directly analyze the answer he wanted to hear from the high-frequency chirps of these little guys. That drow lich has indeed betrayed the tyrant worm. The lycanthropy is dead, and its symbiotic axe has yet to be reshaped. The Colossus seems to have a clone, but it's not in the Acid Fog Canyon. Based on that, the nearest demonic army would be able to wipe out the Bator Expeditionary Army that appeared out of nowhere. Helmet cast a spell to replenish the few communication worm stamina to travel through the ground at high speed. At the same time, he ordered more demons to come. Helmet of the Bardo Planar Fortress Army left the place. Helmet, the cataclysm bug's sub-body's SSSSSS body. Of Helmet's head suddenly turned his head. And Helmet, SSS sub-body turned of, who was standing of Helmet. Of Helmet of Ditto. I think it's better if we don't. Before this insect could finish its objection, it was immediately devoured by the other acid mist worms that made up the body of the calamity worms. Well, it's good that you don't have any objections. Hemtar nodded affirmatively and pointed at the scourge bugs with his right hand. Driven by the sudden effect of the force field, the first-generation calamity bug swarm flew towards the sky of the Acid Fog Canyon, which was always illuminated by the volcano's radiance. It was as if a rocket had been installed in it. One of Hemtar's hands was in a casting motion, constantly adjusting the trajectory of the rocket swarm of calamity bugs, while the other hand was casting another spell, doing two things at once without causing any problems. When he felt that it was about time, he raised both of his hands at the same time. At the same time, he chanted the incantation to cast the spell. Maximum spell, note 1, meteor burst. 4 meteorites created out of thin air by spells suddenly took shape in the air above the Acid Fog Canyon plain. These meteorite-like creations carried the calamity bugs that were forced into the air and fell straight towards the mercenary fortress of the Bardo Plain. A good show is about to begin. The dragon's sub-body muttered to himself after finishing his work. There was no sign of exhaustion on his body, which was usually seen on high-level spellcasters after casting a top-level evocation spell. However, he did not continue to cast other spells. At this time, Hemtar only wanted to quietly watch the show directed by himself. Under the effect of maximum spell, the high-temperature meteorites that fell from the sky were all more than 5 meters in diameter. Moreover, under the deliberate control of the dragon's sub-body, they were in a condensed form, which made the fall even more shocking. As soon as the spell was formed, the Demolic snayed, and Quest keenly sensed the magic waves of this top-notch evoking spell. The other spellcasters in the mercenary fortress of the Bardo Plain also noticed the meteorites. With such a powerful spell effect, and such a large meteorite appearing above their heads, even the warriors who did not know any spells could feel the urgency of the situation. Naturally, they would not sit still and wait for death. How many times can we fight in life? If we don't fight now, when will we? Anti-magic ray, dissociation, Bigby's grappling palm. All kinds of counterspells were cast out by the spellcasters as if they were free. However, the strategic spells that were released by the clone of the Lord of Abyss above the legendary level were certainly not easy to deal with. Not to mention, there was also a first-generation disaster bug swarm inside the meteor. This extra, who had been carefully selected by the great director Helmut Hall to act in the big movie directed and acted by himself, was very dedicated. He did not forget his duty even when he was stuffed in the gap between the meteorites. Many acid mist worms gushed out of his body and directly used his flesh to resist the single target spells cast to stop the meteorites from falling to the ground. Therefore, except for some area of effect counterspells. All other interference with the meteorites were useless. One could imagine what it would be like when a meteor with a single diameter of 5 meters and a combined diameter of more than 10 meters, with some magma on its surface due to the friction with the air, smashed straight into the top of the head. Panic quickly filled the hearts of the defenders in Bator Fortress like bean sprouts that had been soaked in water. Fortunately, when the panic in the defenders intensified and began to develop into despair, they were pleasantly surprised to see 2 dark iron fists suddenly appear out of thin air. Skarath Fist. Some spellcasters who were knowledgeable recognized this spell, and an emotion called hope began to emerge in the hearts of the defenders. Although the 2 tightly clenched fists were not as powerful as the meteors of the meteor burst, the deep color and sturdy appearance of the fists made it easy for people to see that they contained a huge amount of power. Of course, in the face of the terrifying kinetic energy of the meteorites transformed from potential energy, even such a pair of giant fists did not dare to directly face them. The Skywrath Fist could only find the right time to continuously bombard the meteorites from the side. It would be best if it could directly detonate the spell and make it disintegrate in the air. If not, at least it could change the direction of the meteorites. The one who controlled this spell was Keys, the commander of Bartho Plain. However, he also used the strange item borrowed from Snyder to activate this spell. It had to be said that the young blue dragon's decision to hire this Demolik instead of kill him was very wise. This legendary spellcaster had been obsessed with studying escape spells for the past few hundred years and had no interest in collecting other worldly possessions. However, after thousands of years of accumulation, even an ordinary megalosaurus could not compare to him. He could be said to be very rich. Since he had lost his physical body, he could only temporarily reside in the body of this living creature bodyguard, the terrifying armor. Snyder's previous collection, a pair of strange item gloves engraved with the enhanced version of Skywrath Fist, could only be used by Keys. The young blue dragon wore the gloves in the battle command room of Bartho Plain and punched the air again and again. Even mechanical puppet number 21, who always liked to make weird jokes, looked at Keys nervously. No one laughed at his exaggerated actions. After all, judging from the trajectory of the meteorites, the target of the bombardment was where everyone was, the battle command room of Bartho Plain. Fortunately, the countermeasure worked. Even with the Scourge swarm's obstruction, the continuous bombardment of iron fists did not cause the meteor to explode, but it still managed to deviate the falling meteor, causing it to brush past the edge of the wall and crash into the ground outside the fortress. Note 1. In the game, there is a saying of rolling dice. Probability is used to fit the influence of objective factors in reality. Maximum spell, a supreme magic skill, refers to the maximum value of the damage and range of the released spell. This article refers to this setting. Chapter 78. Even though the fortress had escaped the calamity, the prismatic wall outside the fortress was damaged to a certain extent, even though it was only swept by the meteor burst's tail. The aftershock of the explosion even tore the wall apart and expanded through the gap, creating a huge hole in the impregnable defense system. The meteor burst, which had changed its direction due to Key's heavenly wrath punch, plowed a trench on the ground of the acid fog canyon, fully demonstrating the terrifying power of the spell. Looking at the trench that extended from the fortress to the front, the dragon's subbody standing at the edge of the fungus forest shrugged and said, helplessly, "It seems that someone doesn't want us to show up, but with just you guys, we can't stop the attack of the Demon Lord," Snade hurriedly said after Keys took off the strange item glove that had activated the heavenly wrath punch. Although he had become an undead creature, he should not have any emotions, such as fear. However, the blue hellfire in the eye sockets of Snade's skull burned brighter. He continued to emphasize, No one is more familiar with the fluctuation of the spell than I am. That is the characteristic of the spell cast by the tyrant worm's new incarnation, the dragon's subbody, Helmuter. As long as this incarnation appears, the tyrant worm will lurk beside it, waiting for an opportunity to attack. At that time, the group of powerful spellcasters, personal trainers who were treated as distinguished guests by the tyrant worm, were attacked and killed in this way. However, Demolik did not say this out loud. Of course, Keyes knew that his new employee was terrified at this moment, and so was he. What was a demon lord? They were the most powerful demons standing at the top of the food chain in the abyss. These unique demons could command the entire abyss level that they ruled. Even the weakest among them was comparable to the strength of a god. What was the incarnation of a demon lord? The incarnation of a demon lord was the physical manifestation of a part of the demon lord's life force. It was created as an agent to allow the demon lord to safely hide behind the scenes and plot his evil schemes. However, this was only the relationship between the demon lord and its incarnation in most cases. The tyrant worm in the Acid Fog Canyon dimension and its dragon's subbody were inseparable. The incarnation that this guy created was actually growing in its own giant mouth. The other demon lords had various guesses. Some thought that this terrifying worm was too greedy. It wasn't even willing to share its power with its avatar. Some believed that this was because the tyrant worm's intelligence was still too low. It was unable to plan long-term plans to establish demon orders in other material planes like other demon lords. There were also some who believed that it was a kind of trapping nature, just like the anglerfish that lived in the deep sea. After all, everyone knew that this demon lord known as the Tyrant Worm was actually an experimental creation of the previous lord of the Acid Fog Canyon plane. Perhaps he had mixed in the characteristics of other creatures when he was created. All kinds of things were discussed differently. Keyes was naturally unaware of the above conjectures. He was neither a big shot with extensive connections in the bottomless abyss, nor was he a reader favored by the Fate Weaver. Of course, even if he knew this, it would not help him improve his current situation. The Demon Lord's incarnation, Helmuter, and the Tyrant Worm must be lurking nearby. They were eyeing the mercenary fortress of Bar, though, that he was stationed in. We have nowhere to retreat. We have no other choice. This was the final answer given by the young blue dragon. As for Keyes himself, he clearly remembered what happened the moment he was airdropped to this plane. The Batsa Devil did not give him any chance to go back on his word. They must have prepared a backup plan for the situation where the commander fled at the last minute. At that time, the best situation would be to hide in every corner of the multiverse and avoid the pursuit of the demon assassins. The others in the fortress would not have a chance. They could only fight to the end and find a way out in the midst of death. Most of the mercenaries from other planes that were arranged by the Batsu Devil's higher-ups had signed the contract. Breaking the contract in the demon's contract would result in death. Even if they did not sign the contract, the current objective conditions were enough to make the choice of escape directly linked to quick death. Unless the spellcasters had abilities comparable to the Demolik Snader, the idea of secretly opening the gate to another world under the eyes of the Demon Lord of the Abyss and the Batsu Devil Gendarmerie was simply deceiving themselves. If the soldiers chose to abandon the defensive position and walk out of the fortress at this time, it was no different from seeking death. Even if they avoided the patrolling Batsu Gendarmerie, the demon army that had begun to gather outside the fortress could make them start anew, just be reincarnated earlier. Enemy attack. Be careful. The demons are starting to attack the fortress. Little bastards, come out. The demon army that gathered outside the fortress was far larger than before. Those who had a little prestige and power among the defenders knew that it was time to fight for their lives. They spontaneously organized and integrated their forces. It was worth mentioning that this action really sped up the gathering of the demons in Bartho Fortress. The defenders put on their pig-nose gas masks, picked up their weapons and protective gear, and quickly rushed to the positions they were in charge of. Helmet, who was standing on the edge of the fungus forest like an old monk in meditation, opened his slightly closed eyes. This great director, who had previously failed at the box office, made a comeback and began to prepare for his next work. He had the resources of an entire level of the abyss at his disposal, so he naturally had the courage to bring money into the cast. And after summing up the experience of previous failures, the director even decided to put down his pride and personally perform his acting skills. After all, counting on the demons to be good protagonists was no different from believing that if there is a similarity, then it is purely a coincidence. It was different from this great director who had regrouped and was in a flourishing mood. The defenders of Bartho Fortress, who were designated as supporting characters or background by him, at this time saw that the scale of this demon attack was far larger than before, but they were not in the mood to be happy at all. Even if they had defeated their opponents several times and the continuous fierce battles had sharpened the nerves of this group of mercenaries from another dimension, they were still inevitably tired. At this time, these people, half of them were holding their weapons out of obedience to the rules, and the other half were holding their weapons out of the desire to survive in the midst of death. Keyes had already expected this. Previously, when he took the lead to kill the troll and the Firewalker, part of the plan was to motivate the soldiers under his command. But now that he knew that there might be a demon lord lurking among the enemy, the young blue dragon had no intention of foolishly rushing up to kill himself. The young blue dragon chose another method from the books on Earth to motivate the soldiers. He remembered that in the book, The Emperor's Bayonet, there was a technique on how to use artillery tactics by bombarding the enemy directly to make the enemy lose their courage, and at the same time motivate the soldiers on one side. Although it was not to the extent of being able to recite it backwards, Keyes still remembered most of the content in the book with the help of his retrieval memory that he had developed as a programmer. The bastion design that was specially followed in the construction of the fortress's defense system played an important role at this time. The protruding city walls allowed the gunpowder weapons, which Keyes referred to as cannons, and the bats it touted as Hellscream, to form a crossfire boundary. Under the command of the commander, the silver-plated cannonballs, which were mixed with some silver shavings that could form a large cloud of silver mist, were hurled at the demon army without sparing any effort. Seeing the group of Tana re-demons that had just gathered and mindlessly charged at the fortress being killed like chives being cut, this group of mercenaries from another dimension who had no self-restraint rang out loud cheers and roars of excitement. He reached out his palm and touched the silver mist that rose in front of his eyes due to the cannonballs exploding and dispersing when they hit his body. The slight pain on his fingertips, accompanied by the painful wails of the surrounding demons, made Hemtar, the demon lord's dragon subbody, deeply intoxicated. He gradually indulged in this beautiful picture that played out because of him, with war and death as the main melody. Everything has just begun. Chapter 79. This is just the beginning. Keyes frowned as he stood on the city walls, staring at the demon army that was unable to advance due to the bombardment. He didn't need to spend much effort to come up with such a conclusion. Even using his brain to think was redundant. The demon army showed no signs of collapsing. It was as if every one of them had turned into believers of the god of valor. Even though they were heavily injured by the silver bullets, they continued to charge forward. Blue floated to the platform in front of the fort's command center in his gaseous form. He had just finished dealing with the mission Keyes had given him and had returned to report. "Everything is in place. We're just waiting for your orders." Keyes nodded. He knew that he had to find traces of the demon lord and his avatar as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be a waste of ammunition no matter how many towers he slaughtered. Moreover, he estimated that the special ammunition he had prepared would be used up after a few rounds of bombardment. The cannons would have to stop firing as well, or they would be in danger of exploding. As expected, after another 3 rounds of bombardment, the cannons manned by barbed cannoneers began to misfire. Most of the naily demons in the higher towers, including the dozen or so Skyburn walkers left on this floor, noticed this as well. While they ordered their subordinates to send themselves to their deaths, a few of them couldn't wait any longer and charged into the fray. They quickly passed through the vacuum created by the cannons. The battle between the defenders of the fort and the demons was like a bolt from the blue. Fortunately, the morale of the defenders had been boosted, and they didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in the first clash with the demons. Due to their nature, only a few demons noticed the loophole in the fort's defenses caused by the meteors and launched a surprise attack on it. Even though the fortress was in a precarious situation, the mercenaries defending the fortress were mostly violent and belligerent. After their morale had been boosted, they had gotten used to the battlefield where flesh and blood flew everywhere like a meat grinder. Of the 3 ogre brothers, Neru, who was the largest of them all, was fighting the most ferociously. This ogre, who was far larger than his peers, waved his newly modified ebony flail and blocked the gap in the fortress defenses. Any demon that wanted to take advantage of this opportunity would be met with a head-on attack. Unlike the man-eating monster, mechanical puppet number 21, who was helping to hold the line, used an extremely efficient killing method to prove the axiom that in the world of martial arts, only sturdiness could not be overcome, and only speed could not be overcome. His refined gold fists were like agile snakes, often taking the life of an evil demon with a single strike. In addition to the duo responsible for nailing down this defensive loophole, the other defenders were also engaged in a fierce battle. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of arrows tearing through the air was incessant. The Broom brothers, who had been rewarded by Boss Dalton with a purple shirt of fine craftsmanship, had indeed lived up to expectations. They had displayed the greatest power of this fine weapon. Previously, he had deliberately bribed a spellcaster with a small barrel of ale that was jokingly called the warrior's best friend by the defenders. Therefore, his eyes were currently blessed with eagle eye. This undoubtedly improved his already excellent shooting accuracy once again, allowing him to almost reach the terrifying realm of never missing a target. Well done, Barton boy. After an arrow pierced directly into the ear of a Virum that was emitting rotten spores from a tricky angle, Dalton finally found a chance to send the enemy off. I've already said that this bow is more suitable in your hands. Be careful. Dalton's praise suddenly turned into a warning. A Babu demon assassin stealthily approaching did not even have the time to launch a backstab before it was seen through by the master of the Shadow Thief, who had hidden himself very well. He then shouted a warning to the archer, but as the old saying goes, 100 words are not as good as a silence. It was a broad-bladed dagger that stabbed in from the side that really saved the archer's life. Jensen, who had paid for his crime, used his weapon's gauntlet to firmly entangle the Babu demon's thorn, and used his shield to directly smash the Tana re-assassin's skull. The former paladin, who was dressed no different from an ordinary sword and shield wielder, slightly raised his sword and shield and signaled to Dalton. The latter immediately understood what he wanted to say. This idiot boy has some brains. He didn't waste the silver I spent a lot of money to get for him. The corner of Dalton's mouth rose, revealing an almost imperceptible chuckle that even he himself did not notice. After several battles, silver had become an important strategic resource. Naturally, there was an anti-corruption team formed by the Batsa demon within the fortress to monitor the use of silver ingots. However, Kiza's silver bullet offensive had used a lot of silver. Although most of it was corroded while killing the Tana re-demons, there were still some scattered scraps that would be collected when the battlefield was cleaned up and the demons' remains were collected. All the defenders had seen the lethality of silver against the demons, so these scraps had become a hot commodity in the black market that mercenaries from other planes had spontaneously formed. Those who were more particular would spend money to hire a spellcaster to help them wash the surface of their equipment with acid before letting the spellcaster plate the leftover silver on it. Those who were more casual would directly go to the forge in the fortress, melt the leftover silver, and pour it directly on their weapons before borrowing a hammer to hammer it. That was all there was to it. They only needed to invest in a small piece of these scraps to ensure their safety when slaughtering demons. That was why any mercenary from another plane who had some worldly possessions would fork out money to buy these things. Dalton had always been generous with his investment in life-saving equipment, and this time was no exception. After using some of the silver-plating materials he bought for himself, he found a time when no one was looking to throw the rest to Jensen, who looked like a pauper at first glance. Glancing at the sparkling silver light on the sword and shield of this second-rate kid, Dalton understood that the salutation was to express his gratitude. Looking at the former sacred samurai making a prayer gesture, and once again rushing into the depths of the demon army, Dalton sighed softly. Damn it! Due to their alignment, the sacred samurai's attack could cause tons of damage to the chaotic and evil nature of the Tana re-demons. This was also where Jensen's confidence came from. As long as his faith was still there, the lethality of the divine energy he summoned would not diminish. The physical problem that limited his continuous summoning of divine energy was not a big problem for the former sacred samurai, who had been well rested at this time when the battle had just begun. At least when the demons who were fighting separately and pushing each other began to gather to attack him, Jensen was still able to hold his weapon and armor steadily, and through his inner call, attached the divine energy to his shield. He threw the armor that contained divine energy with all his might, and it quickly bounced and hit the gathered demons in a semicircle. Shield bash, evil slashing slash. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.